Gamers of the Underworld. Chapters 419 to 437. Chapter 419. Obvious speculation. In the chaotic garrison guard station of small distant town, the news of the huge explosion shocked the residents. The residents, who were used to serenity, gathered in front of the station to take a look. Sherry's office was in ruins, and the casualties, who were mainly from Eternal Kingdom, couldn't be determined. The garrison guard tried to contact Eternal Kingdom's Lord Sherlock to inform him of the sad news. Sherry thought of how heartbroken Sherlock would be if he knew about the deaths of his citizens while they were on holiday. "Take this." The station inspector placed a towel in front of Sherry. "Thank you." Sherry wasn't injured because the gamers shielded him, but since he was close to the blast, his face and body were covered in dust. "Thank you, Station Inspector." Sherry didn't decline the station inspector's good intentions. He wiped himself, and the station inspector said, "You're unlucky. You've only worked for a few days and have already met with such an incident. Our town used to be peaceful. This was the second time such an explosion has happened." The station inspector noticed that Sherry was quiet and thought that he was intimidated. Sherry was taken aback, and he said, "I'm thinking of the incident. Previously, at the Winterfell Garrison Guard Station, we had difficult cases, but explosions were rare." Yes, Winterfell is a large dungeon, so you must be very experienced. Do you have any new leads?" The station inspector sat beside Sherry. Are you referring to the merchant band case? We obtained the diary yesterday and have some leads. I've investigated many large cases, so I'm experienced. I have detailed speculation," Sherry boasted. "I see, that's good. Tell me about it," the station inspector said casually, but Sherry's forehead was full of sweat. Was he going to give himself away? "Gosh, look at what I found." While Sherry was hesitating, the gamers in the ruins shouted excitedly. It's a huge discovery." Sherry stood up excitedly and returned the towel to the station inspector before proceeding to the gamers. A gamer held the diary that was halfway burnt. The gnome tried to destroy the important diary evidence. There was a metal piece stuck on one of the pages of the diary. The explosion didn't affect the metal piece. Sherry and the gamers examined the metal piece and saw the words, "I left everything in the lava cave." "Gosh, let's explore the lava caves. Make haste, the plot is starting. We'll miss it." The gamers shouted various things as they dashed towards the lava caves like bees. Sherry was speculating in his deep thoughts. He sensed a sinister conspiracy. "What did you discover?" his colleague asked when he saw Sherry's solemn face. Sherry was previously the captain of the Winterfell Garrison Guard, so he must be extremely capable. Sherry remained silent for a while before saying, "I don't have a special lead. The lava caves are the key to finding out the truth." Sherry looked at the metal piece as he spoke. His colleagues were impressed by Sherry's speculation, and they applauded. Sherry is indeed from Winterfell. He's intelligent. Sherry managed to discover that? Sherry wasn't complacent and couldn't be complacent because he hadn't solved the case. There must be a terrifying conspiracy behind these two explosions. Sherry's eyes glimmered with focus. "Even when I'm in this tourist resort, I'm still stalked by difficult cases." Sherlock browsed the forum while he dealt with posts that had mentions about him. He was censoring prohibited and provocative content. While Sherlock was multitasking, Brew explained the incidents in small distant town for the past 2 days in detail. Sherlock's view on the incidents was, such a meaningless incident happened in the town? Though it's meaningless, I feel that it's useful for finding the missing dungeon core. I checked the 2 suicide bombers. The 2 gnomes were members of the 2,500 guards. Brew said immediately, "The merchant band guards that revolted are still near small distant town. They didn't leave, most likely because they are waiting for the buyer of the dungeon core. If I was a guard, I'd be tempted to revolt when escorting a level 3 dungeon core worth billions of magic stones. I'm wary of your loyalty." Sherlock frowned, as Brew said, "Lord Sherlock, don't be wary of my loyalty. My example is referring to those underworld creatures. As you know, I'm not an organic creature. I'm your loyal dungeon core. I'm just joking, don't take it too hard. Follow up on this matter. Like the metal piece is saying, the lava caves have the answers that we need." "I understand, Lord Sherlock." Yes, Sherlock seemed to recall something, and he told Brew, "Call Eggface back. I have a mission for him." Dragonborn felt his heart rate increase. Even though he was in a game, he could feel his heart thumping clearly. Due to the excitement from the tense rhythm of the battle, Dragonborn was enjoying himself. He had never felt such enjoyment before. Though Dragonborn was a reserved person, once he was in a battle, he was like a changed man. That was the reason Takeaspirhit's cool plans were completed by Dragonborn. Dragonborn wasn't acting cool. The live battle provided stimulation of the senses that couldn't be resisted. Dragonborn's enemy wasn't an NPC, it was Hoodlum. The slumbering Hoodlum. After Hoodlum completed a series of strange encounter missions, he went through almost 2 months of training. Since the beginning of the third beta test, he had been fighting and was on the verge of death repeatedly. According to Hoodlum's gaming period, he was in the most desperate of situations for about 10 hours per day. Hoodlum's weapon level was now an astonishing level 10. The most skilled gamer in Victoria City was Dragonborn, who only had weapon level 7. Hoodlum's weapon level was 3 levels higher than the top gamer. It was like the existence of a bug. Dragonborn, who was passionate about fighting, couldn't resist training with Hoodlum. Dragonborn didn't have any impression of weapon level 10 until Hoodlum knocked him out with his bare hands. Hoodlum's movements were nimble, and his fists were like thunderstorms. Dragonborn experienced terror. After his defeat, Dragonborn would pit himself against Hoodlum. However, he had to queue up. Dragonborn wasn't the only gamer who liked PvP and fighting. There were many gamers who were like him. At the wooden gate of Victoria City, a group of gamers was fighting against each other. Though they agreed to restrain themselves, a duel usually ended with death. They couldn't control themselves once the fight began. Once an axe was used to hack an opponent, they would be in a bloody mess. There was no way to hold back in a duel. Seriously wounded gamers would kill themselves and revive to save time instead of wasting time healing. What about healing mana skills? In the entire game, Raintia was the only healer. Though the gamers were exposed to new categories of healing mana skills, the gamers had to pay exorbitant fees and obtain a special mana skills book. Raintia obtained this rare mana skills book from a strange encounter mission. The deformed Hoodlum leapt up and smashed his sandbag-sized fist into Dragonborn, who was wielding his short sword. He stopped Dragonborn's short sword with his shoulder while his fist collided with Dragonborn's skull. Dragonborn only managed to say, "Gosh," to himself before being knocked unconscious. Chapter 420. Fire Giant. You're asking me why I'm so strong? I don't know. An NPC in a strange encounter trained me. I created posts on the forum. You may search for my name on it. The posts are only theory. Even if you use Baidu, you can search for similar information. After fighting and being on the verge of death, the body remembers how to fight. Practice makes perfect. At the entrance of Victoria City, a group of gamers was beaten by a deformed Hoodlum. The gamers were in awe of Hoodlum's fighting techniques. Hoodlum said, "My bare hands are stronger than wielding weapons." The gamers weren't sure of that. They only knew that Hoodlum was humble. Even a highly skilled fighter was afraid of the cleaver. Hoodlum was explaining PvP to the gamers and the essence of each weapon when a group of knights arrived. There were about 100 knights. The horses kicked up a storm of dust, and they looked overbearing. The leading knight held a flag with the side view of a standing golden lion. That was the insignia of the Duke of York. The knight stopped right before the gamers. The gamers stared at the knights. A man without armor walked out from the knights. The man didn't have a beard. His face was very clean. He was the advisor of the Duke of York. The advisor looked at the gamers, and nobody knew what he was thinking. Most of the citizens of Victoria City were handsome guys and beautiful ladies with good proportions. There were also some citizens with common faces, as well as those who were deformed and ugly. This included humans, fairies, and elves. It was reasonable to see fairies, but why were there elves in such a desolate and trashy place like Victoria City? Elves were lone rangers with very unique characteristics. How could they get used to living with humans? Even within the castle of the Duke of York, there were few elves. The advisor noticed the handsome guys and beautiful gals and suppressed his strange jealousy and impatience. He braced his chest and shouted to the gamers, "We are servants of the noble Duke of York. I'm the advisor of the Duke. You have committed violence against the knights of the Duke of York and infuriated the Duke, but he has magnanimously decided to give you a chance to repent. Kneel before me and eat the clay underneath the hooves. The Duke of York will accept your sincere apology." The advisor lifted his head proudly and looked in disdain at the citizens of Victoria City. He was confident that a dignified person wouldn't accede to such a request. Even if the humans were afraid of the power of the Duke of York, the elves wouldn't do such a thing. They showed animosity because it was the Duke's intention to use his humiliation for declaring war. Previously, his knights were humiliated. However, there were only tens of them, and they were capturing an escaped slave. It wasn't good for the reputation of the Duke of York, and his opponents would make use of the incident to diminish the Duke. The Duke was going to incite the citizens of Victoria City. This time, he would let the Victorians attack them first. That was what the advisor thought. The advisor wasn't worried about not being able to escape because he had 100 knights, so he was confident. The advisor was riding on a horse. He held the reins tightly and had no intention to relax. He wasn't bothered by the few citizens of Victoria City who fell to the ground. He thought they had passed out from fear. The advisor waited for these boorish people to attack them. Then he saw an angry elf walk forward. Elf? That would work too. As long as he was a citizen of Victoria City, it was all right. Good. Be angry. Attack. They could then declare war. The advisor almost laughed when the angry elf walked before him. But the elf knelt down and shoved a handful of clay into his mouth, shouting, "What's next? What's the next mission? What?" The advisor couldn't believe his eyes. Before he recovered himself, a fairy ran out and kicked the kneeling elf. The fairy shouted furiously, "Trash! Do you think you will receive a strange encounter mission? If you do what the NPC tells you to do, then there won't be any conflict." The fairy lifted both of his hands and placed them in front of the advisor. His comrades took out a rope and tied his hands. The fairy said to the advisor, "I won't yield. Even if you capture me, sell me as a slave warrior, whip me every day, curse it and humiliate me. Find a teacher to train me, make me train 24 hours per day, and hurt me, I won't yield." His hands were tied. He lifted both of his tied hands and stood before the advisor as he said, "Even if you take me away, I won't yield." More gamers stepped forward and squeezed in front of the advisor's horse. "Capture me, capture me. Look at me, I'm the best candidate for a slave warrior. Me, I'm the only one who is loyal to the Duke of York. Bring me back, I'm willing to do anything. My weapon level is 3. Bring me back, I'm more awesome than these beginners." The advisor noticed a familiar figure, Hoodlum. The advisor panicked when the gamers rushed forward. He turned his horse to retreat, and the knights formed a shield around the advisor. The situation became chaotic. The panicked advisor shouted, "What are you doing? Give way. Get your Lord Overseer out here. The Lord Overseer has to kneel down and apologize to us personally." A knight at the side touched the arm of the advisor. The knight was wearing armor, so the advisor felt a bit of pain. He turned his head and saw the knight pointing to their back. Behind them, a group of boorish-looking humans, fairies, and elves stood in the forest. They were wearing tattered clothing or armor and wielded curved blades. A small group of them had nice costumes. Even the weapons were shiny as though they were enchanted. Wait, since when did they surround them? The advisor was bewildered. Due to his nervousness, he tugged his reins, and his horse neighed as it stomped restlessly in place. A man who had green symbols above his head held the advisor's reins. He looked emotionlessly at the advisor, as though the advisor wasn't a person but a toy. That man said, "It's too late to bring us back as slave warriors. We are taking your horses and equipment." The gamers of Eternal Kingdom were diligently exploring the lava caves. At the entrance of the lava caves, the power of the fire elementals was strong. New elemental monsters appeared out of the lava. To the gamers, it looked like new monsters were generated. The first and second beta gamers had high weapon levels, so they were unable to obtain training at the spider's lair. The gamers couldn't obtain proper training by fighting with the underground spiders, but they could obtain training by fighting with the ogres. However, the criteria for entering the ogre fortress was too stringent. Few gamers could enter the ogre fortress, and it was too difficult to fight an ogre with a 5-member team. The lava caves didn't have any criteria for entering, and there were no limits on the number of gamers. Tens of gamers would surround and fight a lava scout or warrior. Though the lava scouts and warriors would damage their equipment, the gamers found a way to avoid equipment damage, not wearing armor. They fought naked with the monsters. It was common to see naked gamers who wielded weapons. The gamers were enthusiastic about exploring the lava caves. Within a few days, they had completed the mapping of the outer boundary of the lava caves. As gamers ventured deeper into the caves, fire elementals that they had never seen before appeared. For example, Marco Polo discovered a huge monster. "What's that?" Marco Polo shouted as he gazed at a fire giant that was 40 to 50 meters tall. Chapter 421, Third Watch. Marco Polo's first reaction to discovering the fire giant was that he couldn't defeat it. Dungeon was a game that required all of the gamers to cooperate instead of a few gamers or a group of gamers. This was especially important when a big boss was encountered. The bosses that the gamers fought like Manaroth, Khan was during the plot animation mode. The gamers inflicted as much damage as possible on the boss before he was killed by the plot. The fire giant that was tens of meters tall wasn't easy to deal with. Marco Polo captured screenshots of the fire giant and posted them on the forum. The discovery of the big boss spread like wildfire on the forum. Only the gamers of Eternal Kingdom were concerned. The gamers of Victoria City weren't bothered because they had their strange encounters with the Duke of York. That was an encounter that could improve the weapon level to 10. All of the gamers of Victoria City were clamoring to join the strange encounter mission. The gamers of Eternal Kingdom weren't bothered with the strange encounter of Victoria City. They were discussing how to defeat the fire giant, though they didn't know the use of the fire giant in the plot. Shah! A gnome shouted loudly as he wielded a pike and charged at the fire giant in the lava cave. He was quickly engulfed by the flames. The huge fire giant didn't leave the cave. He was guarding something and wouldn't let anyone get near. The gamers who got near were engulfed by the flames. Arrows were harmless against the burning giant. It was close to impossible to defeat this huge fire giant with the power of the gamers. It was fortunate that the gamers had other sources of assistance. "Oh, it's difficult. I didn't expect such a monster at this place." Outside the lava cave of the fire giant, Eggface looked at the giant with an awkward expression. "Do you know how the giant is being formed?" Standing beside Eggface was Brainiac. "At a location with a concentration of elemental power, elemental monsters will be formed. There must be a special reason for such a huge fire giant being formed here," the Black Kitten Polio said. They were the three helpers that Sherlock had arranged to assist the gamers. Sherlock initially arranged for Eggface to help the gamers investigate and explore the lava caves. After the gamers discovered the fire giant, Sherlock sent Brainiac and Polio to assist them as well. Sherlock explained why he didn't help personally, "Because I have more important things to do." While the three of them discussed the fire giant, a group of gamers stood behind them and watched them discussing. To the gamers, it was a plot animation. Finally, Brainiac came up with a plan: create a large monoformation to diminish the elemental power. Then, the gamers would destroy the body of the fire giant. Though it sounded simple in theory, the execution was tough. The first step was the creation of the large mana formation. To create the mana formation, the gamers had to go through the territory of the fire giant, which required much effort and sacrifice. Fortunately, the gamers were fearless. Brainiac turned his head and looked at the gamers behind him. He explained how to create the mana formation to the gamers in detail. "Did you know that the new batch of creatures is here to kill themselves? Are you sure? They look normal. They were even shopping in our small town." "Yes, someone went to the black volcano and saw the group of creatures entering the lava caves. He talked to one of them, and they said that they were going to die." "Wow, that awesome?" Such conversations could be commonly heard in small distant town. Though many suicidal tourists came during the volcano active period, this year, there were far too many suicidal tourists. There was even speculation of some evil cults conducting suicidal rituals. The Sludge Monster tour guide said after being drunk, "The 5,000 tourists on the free tour are here for mass suicide." The rumors spread to the orc, Sherry. Though the suicide of the Eternal Kingdom citizens had no relation to his case, Sherry was still worried for them since they saved his life. Sherry was grateful to them. However, Sherry had to focus on solving his case. After investigation and logical analysis, Sherry had a new discovery. It was from a mysterious letter. Secret report of the Winterfell merchant band's robbery, helpful informant. "Dearest Captain Cherry, since I learned you are from Winterfell, I feel very excited. I have information on a case that I can't tell others. It's regarding a robbery that happened here a month ago. Due to some reasons, I got to know the information. I feel that I have to tell you. The Northern Dukedom is likely implicated. Please investigate the 1+1 hotel in small distant town. You will receive unexpected results. Love from your informant. The letter appeared from thin air on his office table. According to the gamers who were placing the garrison guard station under surveillance 24 hours per day, the letter appeared from thin air. Besides the cleaner and his assistant, Arthur, nobody could access Cherry's office. Suspicion of the cleaner was cleared by Cherry because of the cleaner's innocent face. He couldn't have placed such a letter. Perhaps it was Arthur? Arthur, who was from Eternal Kingdom, was an informant with lots of information. Chapter 422. Battle with the Fire Giant. Small distant town wasn't very big. Cherry didn't spend much effort to find the 1+1 hotel. It was an inconspicuous location, but Cherry suspected that it was the hiding location for the 2,000 merchant band guards that revolted. Cherry brought along Arthur and searched the location, but they didn't find anything. They didn't find any secret basement that could hide 2,000 creatures. Just like that, their investigation stalled once again. Why was that? Where was the location that the letter indicated? Why don't we ask the shopkeepers? Arthur suggested to Cherry. Ask the shopkeepers? Arthur, you're too young. Cherry, who was wearing a coffee-colored windbreaker and a coffee-colored deerstalker, lit up a metal stick and placed it into his mouth. It sizzled, and he puffed out smoke that smelled like burnt protein. He said, the letter said that there is a problem with this shop. According to my speculation, the 2,000 mutinous guards could be hiding inside the shop, making the shop assistant and the shopkeeper potential suspects. Therefore, they can't possibly provide any leads. But, they have already asked. Arthur pointed to the gamers who surrounded the shopkeeper and bombarded him with questions. Cherry quickly walked towards the shopkeeper as he complained about the unprofessional gamers. The gamers gave way to Cherry, giving the panicked shopkeeper a breather. When he saw Cherry, he immediately said, "Are you the new inspector, Cherry?" "Thank you. These creatures are making me out of breath." The shopkeeper was referring to the concerned gamers. "You know me?" Cherry was surprised. He kept his composure when he saw the gamers at the side. He spoke in a low voice as he placed one of his hands on the counter and puffed out smoke. He lowered his deerstalker and looked like a profound detective. "You are the rare immigrant of this town. We were all talking about you." The shopkeeper looked friendly as he said to Cherry, "Yes, I have some information that your assistants were asking for." "No, they're not." Cherry wanted to refute, but he noticed the tense aura of the gamers. He lowered his tone and deerstalker and said in a deep voice, "So, what information do you have?" The shopkeeper observed that the deerstalker was almost covering Cherry's face. He wanted to maintain eye contact as a form of courtesy, but he was unable to do so. He said, "As the merchant band passed by our small distant town, a creature gave me a slip of paper, requesting help." The shopkeeper took out a creased piece of paper and passed it to Cherry. Cherry unfolded the paper and saw the distorted words, "The leader is rebelling. Please save me." The words were almost illegible, but it contained critical information. It confirmed the contents of the diary. The leader of the merchant band's guards was the leader that revolted. "Thank you for your cooperation. After solving the case, I will give you a Good Citizen award." Cherry said to Arthur, "Let's go. We have a new lead. Let's investigate the new lead." "Wait, Captain." Arthur frowned and asked, "What lead?" Arthur's question stunned Cherry. The paper only confirmed the validity of the diary, but it didn't indicate the next target for investigation. "Captain, I have another piece of paper," the shopkeeper shouted to Cherry awkwardly. "Aha, I knew it. This is the lead I'm talking about." Cherry looked at Arthur, who was befuddled. Cherry took the piece of paper from the shopkeeper and saw the words, "Go to the lava caves. The map is in the bank private deposit box 008. Let's go." To the bank. Cherry immediately walked outside. So, Cherry obtained the map? Sherlock browsed the discussion forum that had screenshots and videos. He examined the map that Cherry obtained from the private deposit box. Though Cherry labeled the map as confidential, after Arthur posted the content on the discussion forum, it was no longer confidential. "Brew, what do you think?" "Lord Sherlock, this is a very good chance. There's a map left by a loyal Winterfell resident. It's very likely that the cargo was placed at the marked location. We have to get there before Cherry." The dungeon core must be at that location. We can then upgrade the dungeon, improve the gamer's experience, increase the gamer's count, attack Winterfell, and use it as the springboard. While Brew was going on about his Winterfell occupation plan version N, Sherlock was focused on the map. He opened up another map provided by the gamers after their exploration. The gamer's map was more accurate and presentable than the one Cherry obtained. Brew, what did you discover about the two maps? Sherlock interrupted Brew's plan of occupying Winterfell and asked. The standard of the gamers is higher, Brew nodded and said as he examined the maps. No, take a look here. Sherlock pointed at the two maps and said, from Cherry's map, to reach the destination, the gamers have to go through the cave of the fire giant. Yes, Tisk. How did the merchant band's guards pass through the cave of the fire giant? We don't have a way to deal with the fire giant, Brew said with regret. Sherlock took out a crystal ball that showed the gamers charging at the fire giant. While they were distracting the fire giant, they created the mana formation. Brainiac was supervising the gamer's work, while Eggface and Polio were playing with the catball. The mana formation took 2 days to be completed. The official website updated the monster bestiary. This was the boss bestiary. Boss name: Fire Giant, Leader. Level: Leader level. Description: only at locations with concentrated elemental power will there be powerful elemental monsters. There are no details regarding the fire giant. He can manipulate flames and has the power to destroy the world. Loot: unknown. After the gamers completed the mana formation, the monster bestiary was updated. The gamers guessed that they were about to battle the boss. The information on the boss was scarce, giving the gamers no useful information. That didn't deter the gamers from preparing for their battle against the fire giant. Brainiac infused the mana formation with his mana, and a strange liquid seeped out from the formation. The liquid wasn't water. It was a cold and sticky liquid that moved according to the mana formation. The liquid stuck to the fire giant's body and transformed into a mist because of the high temperature. The flames on the fire giant diminished. It looked as though its fur was cut, and even the temperature of the lava cave fell. Take action now, charge. Brainiac didn't have to give the command. A gamer shouted, and they flooded towards the fire giant. The impatient gamers didn't wait for the tanks to pull the aggro of the boss before inflicting damage. Arrows, frozen arrows, hurricanes, and even fireballs were used against the fire giant. The gamers who used fireballs were stopped by other gamers, as the fire giant looked more energetic after being hit by fireballs. Thousands of gamers battled the boss. They look energetic, meow, Polio said as he fondled the ball in his hand and watched the gamers charging at the fire giant. The fire giant is my servant. I'm the master of dark flames. Eggface also fondled the ball with his claws as he watched the battle with great interest. Meow, as long as they're happy, Polio said before disregarding the battle between the gamers and the boss. On the surface world, the gamers of Victoria City, who were having their strange encounter, were ready to set off on their journey as slave warriors. Chapter 423. We arrived. Why did things turn out this way? The advisor of the Duke of York didn't expect this to happen. He brought 100 knights in a bid to humiliate and incite the gamers to fight them. But he didn't expect them to surrender. He didn't know that hoodlum was a precedent. The other gamers wanted to become slave warriors so that their weapon levels could increase by leaps and bounds. Hoodlum, who had a deformed body, was able to reach weapon level 10. If the other gamers were to become slave warriors, they would be at weapon level 20. That was what the gamers thought. They stripped the advisor and the knights of their clothing and equipment. After an appraisal of the loot, they conducted an auction. Though the prices were good, the most expensive items were the warhorses. Compared to equipment, the gamers were more interested in the warhorses. After that, they asked the advisor and the knights to bring them back to the castle of the Duke of York. They were willing to be slave warriors, especially Hoodlum, who begged to go back. He said that he had a good foundation and experience and that he didn't want to miss the tournament that he had registered for. Otherwise, he would regret it for his entire life. He swore allegiance to the Duke of York, and he was even willing to wash his clothes for the whole night. Would the advisor believe it? If they captured Hoodlum and he begged, then they would just laugh it off and think that Hoodlum would do anything to live. But now, the advisor was surrounded by the gamers. He only wanted to live. Should he accede to their requests and bring thousands of armed gamers back to the castle of the Duke of York? And tell the Duke of York that they volunteered to become slave warriors? Including the escaped hoodlum, who had suffered vicious beatings and was on the verge of death numerous times. And now he begged to come back? Why, was he that loyal to the Duke of York? The advisor was afraid that he would be stabbed to death by the Duke of York before he finished speaking. As for the gamers, they would be shot like hedgehogs at the base of the castle. However, if he didn't accede to their requests, he would be beaten to death by these crazy gamers. The advisor sighed. Life was too difficult for him. Lancelot discovered the incident and reported it to Lilo. After, the three hamsters came over to handle the situation. The three hamsters brought Duchess Lilo's order. You may all go and inform your kitten Duke that our Victoria City won't be intimidated. Even if the Duke were to apologize, it would be too late. If you are sincere about apologizing, we'll take a look at the generosity of your gifts before deciding whether to accept. Do you have food? The three hamsters released the advisor and the knights after stating the conditions. As for the equipment and the horses, they were distributed to a small group of lucky gamers. How could they return the equipment and horses? The nightmarish experience ended. The advisor felt depressed after seeing everyone in their briefs, but he believed that they had accomplished their task. Anyway, they had to find horses to return. The fire giant lifted his arm and smashed his flaming fist at the dense crowd. Flaming fist is coming. Dodge. Gosh. Don't give strange names to the attacks of the boss. Don't block the way. In the chaos, the fist smashed down and ended the lives of tens of gamers. The other attacks of the gamers continued. After being weakened by Brainiac's mana formation, the fire on the fire giant wasn't as strong. At least the gamers were able to get close and attack him without being toasted to death. Not Wearing Pants held his shield and evaded the fire giant's huge fist. If the fist had landed closer by a few meters, Not Wearing Pants would have bitten the dust. His skin melted into the shield due to the high temperature, but he wasn't affected by the injury. Raintia lifted her tree branch magic wand and used her white healing mana skills to heal as many gamers as possible. Is Arthur here yet? Burning Chest Hair asked while Not Wearing Pants was thinking of changing the direction of his attack. Why would he come? He's the only one who can develop Cherry's plot. He obtained the map, and the tunnel behind the boss was marked on the map, meaning that Winterfell's cargo is most likely stored over there. But the truth isn't out yet, so he has to help Cherry with his investigation, Not Wearing Pants replied as he ran while looking out for the fire giant's next attack. The gamers were inflicting damage on the fire giant, whether it was ranged or close combat. The sacred light was very effective against the fire giant. A sacred knight climbed on a rock wall and shouted, "Happy New Semester." Bathed in the sacred light, the sacred knight smashed his hammer on the fire giant's head and caused fiery sparks. The gamers exclaimed in shock. The sacred knight almost died from the fiery sparks that landed on his body after he lost the protection of the sacred light. The gnome sacred knight managed to hammer the fire giant until he was walking unsteadily and wailing in pain. The gamers were feeling jealous of such power and felt the positive energy that the game was promoting. Learn diligently, and they could have everything. The power of sacred light was extremely effective against elemental monsters. There were few sacred knights. Among the gamers, many of them disliked learning and weren't suited to be sacred knights. Even after being tutored, they could only use the knowledge for logging wood. They couldn't pass the sacred knight exam. Besides gamers who climbed walls to jump on the boss, there were gamers who attacked him with bladder bombs. The bombs would detonate due to the high temperature, so they were very convenient. It wasn't clear whether the explosion regenerated or diminished the energy of the boss. After tens of minutes of battle, the gamers couldn't defeat the boss. That was, until Brainiac arranged for the gamers to push a magic cannon inside the cave. The magic cannon was charged and aimed at the fire giant. Open fire. It wasn't known who gave the command, but the magic cannon fired at the fire giant. The mana-infused shell smashed into the fire giant's body. The explosion of the shell extinguished the flames on the fire giant and shook the entire cave. The gamers were worried that the cave would collapse. The quaking stopped after a while. After losing its flames, the fire giant was left with a black rock body that slowly disintegrated, creating a large dust storm. Has it ended, meow? Polio asked as he walked gracefully to Brainiac's side. The dust pervaded the cave and engulfed the gamers. It seems like it has ended. Brainiac nodded as he cleared the fire giant, who was blocking the way. He had completed the task assigned by Sherlock. Eggface flapped his wings and dragged his fat body up a rock pile. Though he wanted to extend his wings to fly, he wasn't successful even after trying for a long time. Eggface looked at the dusty gamers and shouted, "You've done well. Warriors, you're indeed my servants. I'm the master of dark flames, the demon dragon of the night. You have defeated the terrifying flaming master. It's time to enter the deep cave. Return all the treasure to me." The gamers cheered wildly. They then collected the rocks and metal dispersed on the ground. Those were the components of the fire giant. The gamers didn't know what they were, but they had to be useful since the powerful boss could only be killed by the magic cannon. The lava scouts and warriors had lava spars and crystals that could improve equipment. The body parts of the boss had to be very useful since the metal could withstand fire, and it could probably be made into superior equipment. Within 10 minutes, the gamers collected all of the rocks and metal pieces. After ensuring there was no more loot, the gamers continued to explore the deep end of the cave. According to the map, the interior of the cave would provide all the answers. Let's go to the lava cave. Let's see what's at the location marked on the map. Arthur, this is going to be a difficult adventure, Cherry said to Arthur as he wore his armor and held his longsword. We've found that place. Arthur was stunned for a while before he replied. Chapter 424. Cherry's Fluid. The lava scouts and warriors in the lava caves could regenerate. The gamers weren't sure whether the boss fire giant could, as the official website didn't provide the information. The gamers were used to it. They had to draw out their own maps, so what was the big deal? The gamers didn't want to delay. The lead indicated that Cherry had to be brought to the lava cave. After determining the location on the map, they brought Cherry to the place. Cherry arrived at the designated location on the map. He was taken aback by what he saw. There was a huge phoenix statue, and at its feet was a stone tablet that read, "One of the 72 devils, Phoenix, is sealed within." Cherry's pupils contracted. This was big news. That was one of the 72 devils, Phoenix. There was news that one of the devils, Polio, who escaped from Bankasia recently, hadn't been captured. Now, there was Phoenix. Cherry quickly ran outside, and the gamers followed him. Arthur asked, "Captain, what's going on?" "I'm going to inform the Merchant Alliance and the Devil Management Committee." "That's one of the 72 devils, Phoenix," Cherry shouted while he ran. The news of the sealed Phoenix pervaded the forum. All of the gamers of Eternal Kingdom visited the statue to touch it. They asked the NPCs if they knew how to remove the magical seal. Phoenix was one of the 72 devils, and his title was cool. 72 devils? Moros pondered the question during his rest time and said, "There's a legend about the great devil Michelangelo who almost conquered the surface world. He controlled the underworld with his 72 capable devils. I heard that one of the devils, Polio, escaped from Bankasia, which is a strange place. I'm not surprised a creature has a title relating to the 72 devils." Some gamers referred to Sherlock's narration of Michelangelo to Arthur and not wearing pants. Sherlock didn't mention the 72 devils. Phoenix and the escaped prisoner Polio were mentioned by the interviewed NPCs. "You discovered Phoenix, meow? He's an irritating fellow, meow. He should have died during the Heavenly War a few thousand years ago. Besides the surviving elite devils like myself, devils such as Phoenix would have perished, meow." The eyes of the gamers lit up when they heard Polio's answer. When they asked for more plot development, Polio said, "I can't divulge more. I don't know anything, meow." Polio used lame excuses to chase the gamers away. As for Lord Sherlock, the gamers were unable to talk to him. Besides Eternal Kingdom, Winterfell was also plagued by questioning gamers. The news of Phoenix being sealed in the lava cave of the Black Volcano spread like wildfire, and all of the Winterfell residents were discussing it. Cherry was busy investigating the sealed Phoenix. His main target was small distant town because that was the only inhabited location at the foot of the mountain. The townsfolk would know about the sealed Phoenix. In the secret files at the garrison guard station, he discovered information on Phoenix. They were ancient scrolls with faint impressions of paintings that depicted the process of sealing Phoenix. Phoenix, who was in Phoenix form, was surrounded by a group of ogres. The ogre leader was twice its height. While Phoenix was battling the ogres, there were some orcs and gnomes present. Phoenix created a storm of flames and rocks that killed the ogres and his helpers. Phoenix used his years to revive his dead helpers. However, the ogres didn't give up. Their most powerful magician used trickery to trap Phoenix in the black volcano, sealing him inside. On the last scroll were the words, "Only Cherry's fluid can awaken Phoenix." Cherry was shocked. He knew that he had significant contributions to society, but he didn't expect to be that important. According to the scrolls, Phoenix was friendly. He helped the locals defeat the evil ogres and revived the creatures he accidentally killed. Finally, he was sealed by the ogres in the black volcano. What a pitiful creature. Cherry made his decision. He grabbed the clothing at the side and walked outside. His colleagues at the entrance asked puzzledly, "Cherry? Where are you going? Are you still investigating? It's almost after work." "Ah, I'm removing the seal on Phoenix. I'm going to be a hero." Cherry turned his head and gave a thumbs up. Cherry had never felt such a heavy responsibility on his shoulders. Only he could rescue Phoenix. Cherry was at the entrance of the black volcano, surveying the patrols of Eternal Kingdom's gamers. He didn't discover any lapse in their patrols. Their patrols were similar to the 24 hours per day patrols at the Sighing Wilderness. Cherry felt gratified. The warriors from Eternal Kingdom were very responsible. He walked out, and the gamers discovered him. They surrounded Cherry and asked him for new developments in the plot. Cherry replied, "I'm here to remove Phoenix's seal." Gosh, that exciting? They had only discovered Phoenix's statue that morning, and he was removing the seal that night? They had to get the magic cannon or the ballista. The bladder bombs weren't sufficient for such a large Phoenix. The gamers shouted and prepared the weapons. Cherry was touched by the gamers' concern for his safety. They were afraid of Phoenix harming Cherry, so they took up arms to protect him. If there weren't so many creatures around, he would have bawled. The gamers followed Cherry as he went into Phoenix's cave. Along the way, they encountered regenerated lava scouts and warriors. But the monsters were unable to deter the gamers from developing the plot. The gamers used mana and long-range weapons against the monsters. A few fearless close combat warriors shouted, "Charge, leaping slash." When they charged forward, they were killed by long-range attacks from friendlies. Cherry gaped in astonishment. He wanted to stop them from killing their comrades, but he was trapped and pushed towards Phoenix's cave by the surrounding gamers. When they arrived at Phoenix's cave, there were more and more gamers at his side. He even saw Patrick Starr, who holding his magic recording device and shooting, the station inspector of the garrison guard station, his colleagues, the leaders of the town, and the student representatives from the schools. Why is everyone here? Cherry looked at the townsfolk and was befuddled. Patrick Starr put down his magic recording device and looked at the gamers before saying, "I heard them say that you're going to remove Phoenix's seal, so I followed them here. I can't miss such big news. Senior, you told us that you were removing Phoenix's seal, so we came here to support you." Cherry's colleagues shouted from the side. "Yes, Cherry, buck up. Cherry." The station inspector looked benevolently at Cherry and said, "I've always believed that you're extraordinary." "Indeed, I was right. Phoenix's fate is in your hands." Station inspector. Cherry felt something in his eyes. He turned around and walked to the front of Phoenix before bending down. "I can't waste the tears. It's my fluid." The tears dripped onto the statue of Phoenix. Then, Cherry backed up 2 steps and waited for the historic moment. Everyone held their breaths, and the gamers infused the magic cannon with mana. Nothing happened. What's the situation? Is it the correct fluid? Cherry was taken aback. He walked forward and spat his saliva. Nothing happened. He cut his finger and dripped his blood. Nothing happened. He exercised intensely and contributed his sweat. Nothing happened. He extracted his nasal mucus and rubbed on it. Nothing happened. He was at his wits' end. He looked at the faces of anticipation behind him and pulled down his pants. Chapter 425. Sherlock's Arrangement. The gamers and the townsfolk watched intensely, while Patrick Starr recorded the entire event. Cherry convulsed for tens of minutes, his face looking as though he was thoroughly drained. But the statue of Phoenix didn't have any reaction. How can this be? Perhaps it's not me. The dispirited Cherry lowered his head, becoming very doubtful. "Detective Cherry, take a look." The station inspector behind him shouted excitedly and pointed at the statue. Cherry lifted his head and saw crimson mana runes appearing from the bottom of the statue, which stood tens of meters tall. The entire lava cave was quaking violently. It's me. Only I can awaken the phoenix. I might be blood related to Michelangelo. Cherry was joyful and in disbelief. He looked at the residents of small distant town and wanted to share his joy. What if he was able to find the other 72 devils and make them work for him? Then Cherry would be able to become the next Michelangelo based on his bloodline. Cherry didn't have any plans to conquer the underworld. He only wanted to strengthen himself and defeat those who looked down on him. Then he would become a dungeon lord and disguise the 72 devils as commoners, only showing his prowess when required. He had a fiancée who wanted to break up with him. He wanted his fiancée to know that the wheel of fortune would change and that she shouldn't look down on him. Cherry would make himself stronger and stronger. At this moment, he imagined himself to be at the pinnacle of life. Station Inspector. I did it. I did it. Cherry ran joyfully to the gnome station inspector and wanted to give him a big hug. But he didn't spread out his hands to receive Cherry. The station inspector was looking joyfully at Phoenix and not Cherry. When Cherry shouted at him, he nodded and said, "Yes, you trash, you finally did it. I thought you were a great Winterfell detective, so I dared not make it too obvious. I prepared a lot of hidden leads. But no matter what I did, you ignored them. Only when I shoved the leads right in your face could you find them. If I hadn't known that you were the key to removing the seal of Phoenix, I would have stabbed you to death. But now, everything is proceeding as planned." The station inspector relaxed and spread out his hands as he said, "The curse that we have been under can finally be removed. Phoenix is awakening. He will be our slave and fight for our ideals." "Wait, what are you talking about, station inspector?" Cough, cough. "The reporter is still here." Cherry was befuddled. He didn't know if the station inspector was mad. He reminded the station inspector with a soft voice, but the station inspector rudely pushed his hand away. "Get lost, you trash. Stand by the side and wail while you wait for your death." The station inspector shouted angrily at Cherry, who became furious and bewildered. As he was about to question the station inspector, he discovered that he had no strength. The air was filled with a strange gas. Patrick Star discovered he had no strength. Patrick Star fell to the ground. He grabbed the feet of Eternal Kingdom's warriors and shouted, "Poison." The air is poisoned. Nobody was bothered by him. While Cherry was convulsing in front of Phoenix, the gamers were quiet. Nobody moved or talked. "Ha ha ha ha. It's of no use, you outsiders will all die today." The mayor of small distant town walked out, followed by the residents of the town. There were cloaked creatures that came from all directions. They were strange figures. Some were tall, some were fat, and some were short. There was also a sludge monster that made the cloak wet. They walked to the area surrounding Phoenix before pulling off their capes to reveal their faces. Cherry looked at them carefully. All of them were residents of small distant town. "The cleaner auntie. It was you. You're the one who put the letter on my office table." Cherry shouted in disbelief. He knelt weakly on the ground as he looked at an elderly gnome wearing a black cloak. "You didn't take any precautions. I went into your office and closed all of the windows and doors before placing the letter on your office table. Even those suicidal creatures with green symbols knew enough to ask me what I was doing," the gnome auntie said with disdain. "Wait, you're 1+1 Hotel's owner." Cherry wanted to scold the gnome auntie, but he looked up and saw the shopkeeper who gave him the information to investigate the bank. The bank chief, the boss who sold him breakfast, the toilet cleaner uncle, and the kids who kicked pebbles on the road were all here. All of the town residents seemed to have participated in this plot. "What's happening?" "The Winterfell merchant band," Cherry asked with difficulty. "Merchant band? Are you referring to the 2,500 fools who escorted the dungeon core? They could have passed through without incident, just like the other foolish tourists. We spread rumors of the fatal lava caves so that they wouldn't dare to enter. However, those 2,500 fools thought that they had the numbers and entered the lava caves to picnic. Do you believe that? The guards didn't watch over their cargo properly and entered the caves for a picnic. As it was the dormant period, the fire giant wasn't around, so they discovered Phoenix's statue and the secret to removing the seal. They had to die," the station inspector said viciously. "Wait, those two self-detonating gnomes?" Cherry asked with his last bit of strength. "Oh, those two gnomes? They were your Winterfell colleagues. There were too many of them. Though they were poisoned by me, a small portion of them escaped. Some of the survivors were found, but my poison was effective. Before they had a chance to speak, they perished in agony. Those two gnomes tried to prevent you from discovering our planted leads. They were trying to save you. But alas, everything was within our control. Their deaths made you discover even more planted leads. Ha 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 ha. The station inspector laughed loudly. Cherry, who was almost unconscious on the ground, asked, "Where is their cargo, the dungeon core?" "Of course, it's in my house. I'm going to sell it and use the money as my funds for conquering the underworld. Phoenix will be my greatest warrior. I'm going to be the second Michelangelo," the station inspector shouted excitedly as he spread out his hands. It was then that he discovered something was amiss. Cherry was unconscious, so who asked the question? While the station inspector was befuddled, a figure appeared next to Cherry. Half of the face was illuminated with red light from the statue that was becoming redder. "You're Sherlock, Dungeon Lord Sherlock from Eternal Kingdom." The station inspector recognized Sherlock. "That's correct, I'm Sherlock. Greetings, everyone." Sherlock waved to everybody, and they backed up nervously at the sight of a superior devil. He was the superior devil who was repeatedly featured in the newspapers recently. Even one of the 72 devils, Samael, was defeated by him. Though it was only a doppelganger, it was still Samael. The second and third successors to Eternal Fire were being imprisoned in Bancasia due to Sherlock. Who wouldn't be afraid of such a powerful devil? Those previous questions were asked by Sherlock, or to be more exact, Sherlock made Cherry ask those questions. "Sherlock, even if you know about our plan, we aren't afraid of you. Phoenix is awakening. You can't defeat Phoenix. If you yield to us, we'll let you join us." The station inspector was nervous, but he didn't show much fear. "Are you using Cherry to control Phoenix?" Sherlock pointed to Cherry, who was lying on the ground. "Of course not, he was only the key to waking up Phoenix," the station inspector shouted. "Ah, that's good. If Phoenix flees once he awakens, I may not be able to catch up with him," Sherlock nodded and muttered to himself. The station inspector didn't understand what Sherlock was saying. The statue behind Sherlock was starting to shed its outer shell. The crimson light was getting brighter. Sherlock threw away the red berries in his hands and started to loosen his muscles and bones. "What's that?" The station inspector backed up as he gazed at the red berries rolling on the ground. "Oh, those are cherries, a fruit found in the surface world. Phoenix likes them a lot. It's normal that you haven't seen them," Sherlock said with a smile. Behind Sherlock, the shrill shrieking of a bird was heard. Phoenix was free from the magical seal. Chapter 426, Phoenix. The huge phoenix extended his wings, and the rocks that covered his body fell to the ground as the cave quaked. "You're dead, Sherlock." The station inspector of small distant town jumped back. It wasn't known why he did that. Perhaps the jump would make him more convincing. He took out an old scroll, opened it, and aimed it at Phoenix as he said, "Phoenix. According to a primordial agreement, we, as well as our ancestors, protected you for thousands of years. You are now free of the magical seal and have to carry out our single wish." The station inspector shouted, "I want to have 1,000 wishes." Phoenix's flaming body stooped down, and the scroll in the station inspector's hand burst into flames. The extreme temperature of the flames made him throw the scroll away. The station inspector looked bewilderedly at Phoenix, thinking that his wish would be declined. However, Phoenix said, "I acknowledged your wish." "Great, my second wish." The station inspector pointed at Sherlock. "Help me kill him, Phoenix." Phoenix leapt and flapped his wings. He circled the cave once while gazing sharply at Sherlock before diving down. The huge phoenix directed his scorching flames to engulf Sherlock. But the damage from the flames wasn't as severe as the phoenix's ramming. After a loud "pom," the phoenix and Sherlock had created a large pit in the ground. The bird and devil smashed into the deep end of the volcano. The station inspector didn't bother to see the end of the superior devil. His pressing concern was to kill all of the creatures who were stopping him, including the useless Cherry, Patrick Star, and the mercenaries of Nobody Has This Name. The station inspector wanted to make use of Phoenix to find the other 72 devils and defeat those who looked down on him. Then he would become a dungeon lord and disguise the 72 devils as commoners, only showing his prowess when required. He had a fiancée who wanted to break up with him. He wanted his fiancée to know that the wheel of fortune would change and that she shouldn't look down on him. The station inspector would make himself stronger and stronger. He had imagined himself at the pinnacle of his life. As he was about to order the massacre of everyone, the creatures who were immobilized by the poisonous gas became excited. The plot is too extreme. The residents of small distant town are the bad people. Cool, will Shirley die? We'll have a new dungeon lord. Will Brainiac become the new dungeon lord? Wait, why were they not poisoned? While the gamers were chatting, Brainiac, Polio, and Eggface walked over. Brainiac held a document and gazed at the distant station inspector as he shouted, "According to the terms of the Merchant Alliance's contract with Nobody Has This Name mercenary group, we'll terminate the bandits who robbed the Merchant Alliance's merchant band. Kneel down and surrender. Otherwise, you'll die. We waited for thousands of years for this chance. We won't yield. Brave residents, Phoenix will fight for us. Charge. Wah!" The station inspector shouted, and a battle ensued. The pit created by Phoenix emitted explosion sounds, and lava spurted out. The temperature of the cave increased dramatically, but the two parties in the battle didn't care. From the lava that came out of the pit, lava scouts and lava warriors were created. They attacked the gamers. In the chaos, Arthur pulled Cherry's legs to extract him from the battle. Cherry was muttering, "I'm Cherry. Michelangelo?" As for Patrick Star, because of his lighter gnome body, he was carried off by the gamers. Cherry was an orc, and he was too heavy to be carried. He could only be dragged along the ground. Along the way, he bumped into rocks, but Arthur had no other choice. "Arthur, be careful." Arthur cowered and pounced on Cherry's body, and a fireball flew past his body and smashed into a nearby gamer. When the battle started, Arthur received the mission to extract Cherry from the battle. The other gamers also received the mission to extract Patrick Star and confiscate his magic recording device. The gamers had a numerical advantage over the residents of small distant town, but the lava monsters made things difficult for the gamers. Another huge explosion was heard. The ground underneath the gamers was split open, and a crimson phoenix was pushed by an object as it sped upward and crashed through the cave ceiling. More lava flooded in, and explosions rocked the area. "Get out! The volcano is erupting." More creatures started shouting, and the residents of small distant towns started fleeing. The gamers wanted to give chase, but a system notice appeared before them. "The black volcano is about to erupt. Leave the black volcano immediately." The notice was repeatedly shown. The consequence of not leaving was death, with the most fearful thing being the loss of equipment. The gamers started evacuating while fighting with the residents of small distant town. The dense running figures filled the side of the black volcano. An airship was floating in the air above the black volcano. Portside 45 degrees flying rock. A gamer in the crow's nest shouted towards the gamers below as flaming rocks flew towards the left side of the airship. Yoda, who was at the helm, changed direction rapidly, and the airship tilted sharply in a bid to evade the rocks. The flying rocks brushed past the airship with whistling sounds. Numerous gamers were sprawled on the railing of the ship as they gazed at the volcano eruption and the dense fleeing figures of the gamers and the residents of small distant town. "Continue to increase altitude. We are within range of the flying rocks." Hemp rope technology surveyed the black volcano and shouted to Yoda, who activated the elevation rudders. The airship continued to climb. Eggface and Polio were on the airship, which Sherlock arranged. Their task was to direct the gamers to fire the magic cannons. To be more exact, they were to infuse the magic cannons with mana. One was a mana-rich black dragon, and the other was one of the 72 devils, Polio. They were able to perform the task with ease. Though they were unable to provide tens of volleys like Sherlock, they were able to supply mana for 2 to 3 volleys. Polio tightly grasped the railing on the deck of the airship with his paws. He couldn't fly now. Previously, he could fly without a physical body. But he was currently trapped in a black kitten by Sherlock's special method. If he fell, he would be smashed to bits. He wouldn't die, but his body would be useless. That would be a pathetic state. Eggface also tightly grasped the railing like Polio. Though he had wings, they weren't very obedient. He sat in front of the computer for long periods of time without training. In addition, the gamers fed his voracious appetite, and he became overweight. His wings weren't able to carry the heavy weight. Sherlock noticed this problem and used various ways to encourage Eggface to exercise, but Eggface was never one who could be encouraged to exercise. "Have you found Lord Sherlock, meow?" Polio's face was distorted by the strong winds, but he squinted his eyes as he gazed at Phoenix and Sherlock, who flew out of the volcano. Both Phoenix and Sherlock vanished in the huge gray cloud emitted by the volcano. "There, I see the Phoenix," the gamers in the crow's nest shouted. "Gosh. We're finished. We're dying. Full rudders." In the thick dust cloud, a fiery red figure flew towards the airship as he gave a shrill shriek. Yoda changed direction rapidly, and the airship looked like it lost control as it swerved sharply. The Crimson Phoenix was still dashing towards the airship. Before the Phoenix reached the airship, it was knocked away by another figure. The Phoenix lost his balance and scraped past the airship as he plummeted. "Shirley's awesome. It's too cool. Where's the Phoenix? I'm firing the cannon. Where's the Italian cannon? Get it out. Wah!" The gamers were shouting. Chapter 427. It was picked up. To the gamers, the battle between Sherlock and Phoenix was like immortals fighting. From the beginning, they vanished. Due to the eruption of the volcano, thick smoke and dust filled the sky, and the figures of Phoenix and Sherlock disappeared in the broiling smoke and dust. Sherlock didn't voluntarily hide in the smoke and dust. Not long after the battle started, Phoenix tried all ways and means to hide in the smoke and dust. Every time, he was pulled out by Sherlock and given a beating before he went into hiding again. Most of the gamers were watching the Battle of the Immortals as though it was a plot animation. Though a small portion of the gamers on the airship was participating in the battle. As they were adept in controlling the airship, they were chosen to provide air support to Sherlock. Eggface and Polio provided mana to the magic cannons. As for the gamers, they only operated, aimed, and fired the cannons. Only a few gamers were able to fire the cannons. Most of the gamers were in charge of the control of the sales, logistics, and surveillance. The gamers on the airship didn't provide much assistance to Lord Sherlock. At least the gamers on the airship were happy. The gamers on the surface were jealous. How nice it would be to fire the magic cannons, though the cannons couldn't fire after a few volleys. The battle on the surface soon ended. When the residents of small distant town ran out of the black volcano, they were beaten by the gamers waiting outside. The residents of the town weren't able to defeat the gamers since they weren't combat trained. They lived like normal commoners, and their combat power was far inferior to the battle-hardened gamers. After a few casualties, the station inspector and the residents surrendered. Besides the subordinates of the station inspector who had superior equipment, the other town residents didn't have any decent equipment. Rolling pins, hammers, pitchforks, and sickles weren't much of a threat to the gamers. After the residents surrendered, the gamers didn't kill them. The gamers only asked for them to surrender their equipment, weapons, and magic stones. The gamers profited massively. The town was a tourist spot, so every year, many tourists went there to spend money. Therefore, most of the residents made a lot of money. While the gamers were happily collecting the magic stones, the battle between Sherlock and Phoenix concluded. The gamers saw Phoenix's figure emitting lava and rocks while plummeting like a comet towards the foot of the black volcano, where it exploded. The gamers were standing at a safe distance as they exclaimed in shock. Not far away, a convoy of Beetlemans carrying Winterfell's troops was traveling at high speed towards them. There was finally closure on the Winterfell merchant band's robbery at Black Volcano. The incident started thousands of years ago when a calamity engulfed the surface world and the underworld. Phoenix, who was one of the 72 devils, was a subordinate of Michelangelo. After Michelangelo was defeated by the Heavenly Kingdom, Phoenix escaped to the underworld's Black Volcano and had a conflict with the local residents and ogres. He chose to side with the residents and defeated the ogres. The weakened Phoenix required a large number of resources to recover his power. After Michelangelo had fallen, the penalty from the Devil Management Committee was severe. Phoenix was labeled a war criminal. If he didn't escape, he would have ended up like Polio, who was imprisoned at Bancasia. Phoenix decided to seal himself in one of the lava caves of the Black Volcano. He could avoid being captured, and he could heal himself at the same time. He made an agreement with the local residents to free him after a few hundred years. Phoenix even signed a contract with the local residents. The few hundred years were too long. After 2 generations, it became a legend, and very few creatures knew how to remove the magical seal of Phoenix. The contract had been nearing its end, and if the residents of small distant town reneged on the contract, they would be cursed for a lifetime. They wouldn't have big toes forever, including the slimes. They wanted to avoid this horrible curse. Then the residents found out about Cherry in the newspapers. With the help of a mysterious creature, they started a detailed plan. They wanted to avoid the curse and control Phoenix to conquer the world. They wanted their heavy responsibility to aid in their world conquest. They tried all ways and means to invite Cherry to small distant town to work. However, they all failed. Cherry only wanted to stay in Winterfell. After Cherry resigned from his job, he came to small distant town. The Winterfell merchant band passed by small distant town and the Black Volcano. The merchant band incident was actually an accident, according to the residents. They plotted to let Cherry remove the magical seal of Phoenix, but they discovered that they had made a mistake. Cherry wasn't required to remove the seal. Instead, it was the fruit called cherries from the surface world. Phoenix brought some cherries, but they were eaten by the residents' ancestors, who forgot about leaving some for Phoenix. What, are you saying that our story is nonsense? You reporters are the ones who are nonsense. You reported on nonsense. Do you know how we feel? We protected Phoenix from being imprisoned in Bancasia for thousands of years. And how did he repay us? Do you know how it feels to be without the big toe? If we can get back our toes, we're willing to exchange the world for them. You don't understand, you're full of nonsense. The captured station inspector shouted furiously to Patrick Starr. Winterfell garrison guards were restraining the station inspector as he was escorted to the beetleman destined for Bancasia. The guards shouted angrily at the station inspector, "Shut up. You'll rot in Bancasia forever." The Winterfell business unit first assistant and Nicholas's butler, Sludge Monster, turned his body and looked at the dusty Sherlock and the leader of the Nobody Has This Name mercenary group, Polio. "We're very grateful to Captain Polio and Lord Sherlock. It would have been impossible to solve such a complex and sinister case without your help. This is what we should do, meow." Polio was solemn. Sherlock nodded and said, "That's right. We didn't expect the tourist attraction to have such a sad secret. Small distant town was under a curse, and Phoenix was a jinx. It's a pity that Phoenix managed to escape. It's my fault for being unable to defeat him. Otherwise, I'd have sent him to Bancasia." As Sherlock spoke, he used his finger to stroke a red parrot that was perched on his shoulder. The parrot with ruffled feathers stared with its eyes wide, one of which was blue-black. The parrot showed an expression that indicated that it didn't dare to move. Phoenix's escape is a troublesome issue. Fortunately, there was no massive damage. The 2,500 brave escorts of the merchant band can now rest in peace. "It's a tragedy." The sludge monster sighed. He hesitated for a while before asking, "Lord Sherlock, is it possible that Phoenix was wounded by you and went into hiding? I heard from the crazy station inspector that you were fighting fiercely with him. Even the magic cannons on the airship were firing on him. Could he be seriously wounded? Fighting fiercely with him? No. 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 Phoenix had the upper hand. How could I defeat one of the 72 devils?" Sherlock said as he caressed the beak of the parrot, which swallowed hard. Polio's hair also stood on end for no reason. "Of course, you may dispatch your troops to search. You may get lucky and capture Phoenix." "Ah, if that's the case?" The sludge monster nodded and hesitated again before saying, "What about the dungeon core that was hidden at the station inspector's house?" "What? The dungeon core was hidden in his house? Why didn't I know that?" Sherlock was shocked. "Ah, that's what he said. When we searched his house, the dungeon core was missing. The station inspector said that you took it. Of course, we don't suspect you. It's just a casual question. Did your subordinates take it away?" The sludge monster asked puzzledly. "Really? Please wait for a while." Sherlock grabbed Peasant, who was standing by the side, and asked, "Did you go to the station inspector's house? Did you see the dungeon core?" "Huh? What dungeon core?" "I don't know." Peasant was bewildered as he was thrown to one side by Sherlock. Sherlock shrugged his shoulders as the red parrot shifted its legs uncomfortably. "They don't know about the dungeon core. I don't know either. How could they know? The station inspector must be lying. He must have sold the dungeon core or destroyed it. You must interrogate him carefully. Don't believe his accusations. He hates us to the core, so he's trying to frame us. What you've said is logical. I'll investigate the matter. Thank you, Lord Sherlock and Captain Polio." the sludge monster said. It's nothing much. This is what a superior devil should be doing. It's difficult to maintain the peace. The credit goes to the Merchant Alliance. It's our duty to help the Merchant Alliance. Sherlock asked, the remuneration. Don't worry, Lord Sherlock. 10 million magic stones will be transferred to you. Your Captain Polio's account, the sludge monster said. Sherlock nodded. He was happy with the efficiency of Winterfell. The sludge monster suddenly asked, Lord Sherlock, where did you buy the parrot? How much was it? He's handsome and obedient. Does he have a name? Him? I picked him up. He's called Phoenix, Sherlock said with a smile. Chapter 428. Sherlock's New Idea. In a dark room, Alexandria held a newspaper with the words, Eternal Kingdom's Dungeon Lord Sherlock solved the merchant band robbery, on it. The newspaper wasn't the Winterfell Monthly Digest, which was full of advertisements. The newspaper was the Monthly Chronicles of the Northern Dukedom. Lord Alexandria, we don't have news of Phoenix, the sludge monster said as he stood before Alexandria, holding a document holder. I understand. Find a chance to cut off the tail, Alexandria said while he looked at the newspaper. The sludge monster awkwardly said, it may be difficult to get past the security of Bankasia. Settle it before they arrive at Bankasia, Alexandria said without lifting his head. I got it, yes, I heard that Sherlock has a powerful lich called Brainiac. Is that correct? The sludge monster turned around when he heard Alexandria's question. He opened up the document folder with his wet tentacle and said, that's correct. He's called the once-in-a-thousand-year genius lich who graduated from Spectre College. His mentor was the famous Professor Bacon. Professor Bacon, do you still have our collaboration plan with Spectre College? Alexandria, who was sitting in his chair, asked the sludge monster. We still have it. Carry out the plan. The sooner, the better. The robbery of the merchant band at the Black Volcano was solved. The only regrets were the death of the 2,500 merchant band guards and the missing dungeon core. Phoenix vanished after his magical seal was removed. The fortunate thing was that the loss of Winterfell was shouldered by the residents of small distant towns since they took part in the robbery. When the Merchant Alliance sent someone to account for their properties, they discovered that the wealth of small distant town had diminished. Most of the merchandise, furniture, and magic stones were missing. The Merchant Alliance suspected that the residents diverted their wealth. However, it was a mystery why the residents shifted their furniture. The residents still had immovable properties to pay compensation. Since the magical seal of Phoenix was removed, the black volcano erupted incessantly. Therefore, the foot of the volcano was no longer suitable for living. The Merchant Alliance sent specialized staff to investigate the situation. The conclusion was, due to Phoenix, the elemental power is chaotic, and the volcano has become extremely active. The eruption will last for a long time. It's suggested that the rating of the tour be increased by a star. Though it was a better tourist spot and a piece of good news for the Merchant Alliance, the elemental monsters multiplied and created problems. The Merchant Alliance was fortunate because they had a friendly and helpful neighbor, Eternal Kingdom. No problem. My citizens strongly request to guard the lava caves. They want to help the Merchant Alliance maintain order. It's our duty, Sherlock said righteously. Sherlock's strong request moved Dungeon Lord Nicholas, who reported immediately to the Merchant Alliance. The Merchant Alliance was very grateful to Sherlock since their problems could be solved. Sherlock was also paid remuneration. Though Sherlock claimed that he didn't require the remuneration, the Merchant Alliance decided to provide monthly raw materials as remuneration. Raw materials were essential to a developing dungeon. The Merchant Alliance didn't make a loss. As long as the Black Volcano was a tourist attraction, they would be able to earn profits. To the Merchant Alliance, the incident at the Black Volcano was finally concluded. The compensation to the Northern Dukedom was an issue to be solved by the Merchant Alliance. As for Sherlock, he had to investigate many things. Are there any leads regarding the mastermind who tempted the residents to remove the magical seal of Phoenix? Sherlock sat in a luxurious room, which was decorated with bookshelves and books. The room was filled with the decadent scent of knowledge. Sherlock felt a bit uncomfortable. In front of him was a sludge monster, who was sitting in an executive chair. He provided intelligence to Sherlock on many occasions. He was also managing the illegal tuition business. The mastermind is slick, unlike in Bankasia, where we have many moles for collecting intelligence. I speculate that it's Alexandria. His recent activities have been related to finding the locations of the 72 devils. It's still a mystery where these unlucky blokes are. The red parrot perched on Sherlock's shoulder said threateningly, "Huh? What are you talking about, sludge monster?" The sludge monster didn't expect Sherlock's pet to speak and was stunned. Sherlock knocked on the parrot's head with his finger, then smiled and said, "My new pet. He has learned many strange languages. Please don't mind him." The parrot became more restrained. "It's nothing. It's an intelligent pet," the sludge monster replied, then said, "I'll keep a close watch on the Northern Dukedom. I'll have to depend on you. This is the payment for intelligence." Sherlock threw out an adamantine rock, and the sludge monster put it into his hand. When mana was infused into it, images appeared around the room. It was mathematical formulas and symbols surrounding the sludge monster, who was extremely pleased. What a decadent creature. Sherlock put on his hat and left the room with his parrot. As Sherlock was leaving the room, Phoenix asked, "Is someone searching for the 72 devils? What does he want? Is he recruiting devils like Michelangelo? Did Michelangelo have this hobby?" Sherlock was puzzled and asked, "Why not? To make up the 72 devils, he also recruited some weak fellows. We are the superior devils, unlike Polio, who doesn't seem like an elite. He was like a gas that wandered around and showed off his mental control gimmicks. It's a disgrace to our identities. It's awesome to be one of the 72 devils, but we had such a lousy fellow." "Yes, the black kitten Polio that you are keeping is like that trash," Phoenix said bluntly. "He is Polio, the gas that wandered around and showed off his mental control gimmicks," Sherlock said to Phoenix. "Aha, this is an interesting joke. That's what the black dragon said too." Phoenix laughed heartily, finding it funny. But when he saw Sherlock's solemn face, his laughter stopped. "Really? That fellow? Polio? Yes. How could it be? Does that peeping Tom have a physical body? A stupid black kitten? Impossible, I don't believe it. Unless I become a parrot. Ha ha ha, ha, ha," the parrot Phoenix said and started to bawl. A bawling parrot wasn't pretty to look at. In fact, it was hilarious. "Lord Sherlock, I'm unable to understand why you don't let Phoenix be in his true form instead of a parrot." "A phoenix is much more powerful than a parrot," Brew said to Sherlock while Phoenix was bawling. Do you wish Eternal Kingdom to be an inferno? If other creatures come to know that Phoenix is with me, there will be serious consequences. The Devil Management Committee will impose a hefty penalty on me." Sherlock asked Brew, "Have you assimilated the dungeon core?" "Of course, it's delicious. I'm even having indigestion. I can upgrade to a level 4 dungeon core anytime and expand the capacity to 50,000 gamers." Brew said immediately, "But if I do that, you and Miss Lilo will be the first superior devils in history to be mana drained to death." "We won't be drained to death. More like malnutrition," Sherlock corrected Brew and said, "We have to find a replacement for mana." "How about making a mana storage pool?" Brew suggested. "It's of no use. There's no mana storage pool that can sustain so many gamers unless it's the Yggdrasil." Brew shouted, Isn't there a Yggdrasil in our flower bed? Are you referring to the tree planted by Raintia? It's too small. If it were 100 years older, it might just suffice." Sherlock waved his hand. "It's a pity. Wait, I have a bold idea," Sherlock abruptly said. "For your bold idea, we have a comprehensive criminal law." "What are you talking about?" "It's nothing, I'm just fooling around." "Lord Sherlock, what's your idea?" "How about speeding up the growth of the Yggdrasil?" Chapter 429, Coronation. Queen of Victoria City, speeding up the growth? How? Can the growth of Yggdrasil be sped up? By absorbing 5,000 kilometers of Jinkala that contains NPK? Brew was taken aback. It was beyond his knowledge. "No such thing, but I have other ways which are more complex. We can plan slowly. I'm not in a hurry." Sherlock said, "Before that, complete the updates that we discussed to improve the gamer's experience." "I understand, Lord Sherlock. Do we have to care about Victoria City?" Brew asked. "No problem. Lilo knows what she's doing," Sherlock said casually. "What shall we do? Does anyone have a good suggestion?" Lilo frowned as she sat behind the table while gazing at the rows of employees in front of her. They were the elf Untouchable, the dwarves Hill and the King, Grand Priest Baldhead, Knight Lancelot, and her loyal bodyguard Hamsters. "Shall we have our meal first?" Fat Otaku said happily. Palm. Big Boss gave Fat Otaku an elbow jab. Lancelot frowned and said, Duchess, are you saying that you want to have a full-scale war with the Duke of York and take over his territory, resources, and population? Is that what you mean? You have to find a successor to the York territory. It's best if it's a male successor. Then you can get married to him before assassinating the current Duke of York. After, you can denounce his successor and make use of your successor to declare war. Once you've achieved victory, the York territory will belong to your husband. In other words, it will belong to you, Lancelot said. This was a method the nobles used to usurp territory. Besides the king's bestow, marriage was the easiest way to gain a title. The plots and conspiracies to gain power were innumerable. Most of the nobles didn't die of old age or war, they were poisoned or killed in various ways. It would be easy to write a book called 100 Ways for a Noble to Die. But Sherlock doesn't have the power to bestow titles. Lilo frowned. Sherlock is. Lancelot was bewildered. From her age and appearance, Lilo didn't look like she would be married. Perhaps she was already married? Big Boss edged closer to Lilo's ear and reminded her, Lord Sherlock has the power. He has the power to bestow titles in Eternal Kingdom. I have a new idea. A perfect plan that nobody thought of. Second Boss shouted at the side. First, we find a female successor to the York territory. We then let the female successor and Grand Priest Baldhead get married. Afterward, we assassinate the current Duke of York. We can denounce his successor and use the female successor to declare war on the new Duke of York. After achieving victory, Grand Priest Baldhead will be the Duke of York. Grand Priest Baldhead is our employee, so his territory belongs to Duchess Lilo. Big Boss, Fat Otaku, and Lilo applauded. They were in awe of his wisdom. Wait, is that any different from what I said? And there are many problems, Duchess. Lancelot immediately rebuked. Let's not discuss whether a female successor is around. Most of the female successors are already engaged. Moreover, Grand Priest Baldhead isn't able to get married. If your subordinate acquires a territory, because both you and your subordinates are of the Duke and Duchess level, he will become independent. The territory won't belong to you. No problem. I'll not be a Duchess, I'll be a Queen. My Duchess title will now be Queen Victoria. Lilo waved her hand and said casually, Duchess, the Queen title isn't bestowed like this. Lancelot was about to explain that the throne had to be acknowledged by everyone, including the sacred crowning by the church, when Grand Priest Baldhead said excitedly, Grand Duchess. I'm willing to perform the coronation. I was once a bishop. If this is the will of the Holy Lord, to let you create the sacred kingdom, I'm willing to help you. You've shown many miracles. The reviving humans are the best proof. Only God and the messengers of God are able to let them revive. Is a bishop required for the coronation? Conduct the coronation immediately. I'm going to be a queen now. Grand Priest Baldhead said, no problem. Please open up your castle so that your citizens may witness your coronation ceremony. Is that necessary? Though Lilo was wary, she ordered the 3 hamsters to open up the castle door. The gamers who were working and preparing for war saw the castle door open. The hamsters were shouting, come inside to watch the coronation ceremony. Duchess Victoria will be crowned Queen Victoria. The group of gamers flooded the castle. Lilo was going to be crowned queen. How could they miss such an exciting plot? The gamers could ransack the Duchess castle at the same time. Previously, Lilo had forbidden the gamers from entering. However, when the gamers entered the castle, the items weren't interactive. The system was prepared against the gamers. When most of the gamers arrived, Grand Priest Baldhead said, do you solemnly swear to govern the Victoria Kingdom and the citizens, manage their lands, and respect the laws and customs? Lilo nodded. Do you have the compassion and the will to let the law and justice be handled by the judge? Lilo pondered for a while and shook her head as she said, I'm the law. Wait a moment. Grand Duchess, please pretend a bit. Lancelot wanted to remind Lilo, but Grand Priest Baldhead said, may the Holy Lord bless you. With wisdom, with the royal law, with the holy gospel, you'll be Queen Victoria. After Grand Priest Baldhead finished shouting, he took out a small vial from his pocket. The vial contained sacred oil, which was a transparent and oily liquid. Grand Priest Baldhead dripped some sacred oil on Lilo's head and looked around. Then, he created a crown from a piece of paper and placed it on Lilo's head. Grand Priest Baldhead stepped back and looked emotional. The gamers started shouting, "Queen Victoria! Queen Victoria!" Hill and the king said that they would create the most beautiful crown and scepter for Queen Victoria. Even Untouchable, the elf, promised to create the most beautiful plant-based costume. Lancelot was deep in thought. Grand Priest Baldhead said, "Great Queen Victoria, I can't get married, but Knight Lancelot can do so. If you wish to arrange for Lancelot and a noble lady to get married, you have to bestow him a title." The gamers began shouting wildly, "Glamorgan, Glamorgan, we'll draw a Glamorgan for him. I nominate him as Count Glamorgan." "I second that." "Very good. I'll bestow you the title of Count Glamorgan, Count Lancelot." Lilo lifted her head proudly and said to Lancelot. Goldshire Town outside Victoria Forest. A group of knights was resting in the small town while the servants of the knights took care of their horses. In one of the largest rooms, the commander was planning for a battle. This was originally the house of Goldshire Town's mayor. "This is Victoria City." A golden-haired man wearing magnificent armor pointed to Victoria Forest's location on the sand table. Goldshire Town was 2 days' journey from Victoria Forest. The middle of Victoria Forest was cleared and replaced with a small house to represent the buildings. "No, the area is twice the size," the advisor of the Duke of York said as he extended his hand and expanded the forest markers. "What, they expanded by 2 times in less than a month?" the knight at the side asked in disbelief. "I know that you went there the second time, but is that true?" According to the knights from the first visit, the area wasn't that big. "I know that it's hard to believe, but it's true. There's a wall on the outer boundary," another knight said as he drew a circle. The area of Victoria City was expanded 3 times. "No problem." The golden-haired knight waved his hand nonchalantly and said, "Even if it expanded by 2 times, we have 3,000 knights. We'll defeat them." "That's right. I'll feign a frontal attack with 500 knights, while the rest will lay an ambush in the forest outside. When they pursue us outside the forest, you'll surround them. Remember, don't let anyone off. Kill them or capture them." "This is an order from the Duke of York," the golden-haired knight said coldly. Chapter 430. Wounded NPC. "Did you hear that? The Duke of York is attacking Victoria City." "What, Victoria City? I haven't heard this name before." "You haven't heard it before? That's the group of barbarians living in Victoria Forest." They shouted excitedly and ran towards the people that they saw. "That kind. The kind which is rare." "Ah, I understand." This was what the residents of Goldshire Town were gossiping about. It was a popular topic as 3,000 knights arrived at this desolate place and were ready to siege the barbarians in the forest. The residents had deep sympathy for Victoria City. The enemies of the Duke of York didn't have good endings. In Goldshire Town, a thin human in a cloak listened to the gossip and grasped his cloak tightly before leaving. The thin human left Goldshire Town and ran towards the distant Victoria Forest. A few humans were traveling fast in the thick woods. The leader was Dragonborn, who was wielding the crimson sword. He lowered his body and traveled rapidly among the trees. His eyes were focused in front, and his solemn expression was terrifying. "Dragon, take a spear." Hit was about to speak when Softy covered his mouth, gesturing for him to be quiet. She was as solemn as Dragonborn. Dragonborn glanced back and remained silent, then looked intently in front. In the next instant, there was some movement in front. Dragonborn shouted, "Take action now." Dragonborn pounced forward and slashed the trees in front with his crimson sword. The tip of the crimson sword flashed, but he missed. A small bunny evaded the attack nimbly and dashed towards another bush. Before it reached its destination, an arrow flew over. Softy fired the arrow from behind Dragonborn. The arrow brushed past Dragonborn's ear and flew towards the bunny, missing by an inch and landing in the bush. "That was too close. I almost shot my Dragonborn bro." Softy felt fearful. Dragonborn stopped and looked intently at the bushes before turning his head to shout at Softy, "You shot a human." "No, you shot an NPC." Lancelot walked briskly on the streets of Victoria City. It wasn't known when the rain started, but the roads became muddy. Though the proposal of paving the roads was already submitted, there were too many jobs for the gamers to complete. The rocks supplied by Eternal Kingdom were also limited, and the gamers had to use great effort to mine for rocks. Hence, the paving of the roads was delayed. More importantly, the gamers preferred building houses to paving the roads. Lancelot's destination was a private house. To him, it was a private house. To the gamers, it was a guild's stronghold. Lancelot didn't know what the guild called for that night with Sherlock was about. Was it a labor union? Commerce guild? He was unable to figure it out. Lancelot walked to the door and knocked. Behind him were several observing gamers who were curious about the impending plot. Z's ya. The wooden door opened, and a few gamers walked out. They looked around and said, "We asked for Untouchable. Why is Lancelot here? Can he heal?" A befuddled gamer asked Lancelot whether he could heal. "Let me take a look. I know some basic first aid." Lancelot pushed open the door and walked in. There were many gamers inside the house, and the air was turbid. Lancelot could barely breathe. The air was filled with various stenches that he couldn't endure. But he frowned and walked in. He saw a wounded person lying on an extremely dirty bed. The wounded person had an intact arrow impaled in their chest, which was stained by fresh blood. The gamers didn't treat the wound at all. The pale, wounded person was wearing a black cloak. She had white skin and looked like a very young girl. How long has she been wounded? Lancelot removed his armor and walked to a basin of water. When he looked at the dirty water, he was taken aback. He decided not to wash his hands. About half an hour. Wah, are you capable? Don't kill off our prop. How do you know it's a strange encounter? Perhaps it's a coincidence. This must be a strange encounter. Have you shot an NPC before? Someone in Eternal Kingdom shot at Brainiac and Shirley. Gosh, that gamer is so cool. Is he bragging? The gamers started chatting wildly. Lancelot was used to these gamers, who would use every opportunity to chat regardless of the situation. They weren't cold-blooded. Lancelot was saved by them before. They used their bodies to shield Lancelot from vicious attacks. He was just feeling puzzled. Lancelot nodded, unable to wait any longer. If he didn't stop the bleeding, the girl would die. He had to make haste. Lancelot walked over to the girl and said to the gamers at the side, "You go out first. She's a girl, and there are too many eyes. She'll be embarrassed later." The gamers were unhappy. "What? You can see, but we can't." "Shucks. R18? Is there such a restriction in the game? What? That exciting? She's flat-chested. What's there to see? Make haste. What gal haven't I seen before? Don't be ridiculous." The gamers followed his instructions and left the house. Those who were unwilling to leave were dragged out by their comrades. It was a strange encounter NPC, so all of the gamers were very concerned, especially Softy. Lancelot made a few female gamers stay back to provide assistance. The gamers who weren't selected shouted various things. "Gosh, I should have created a female account. Trash. Why don't you create a female account? I like to roleplay a male character. Once the marriage system is implemented, you'll definitely suffer." Lancelot noticed that the expressions of the female gamers were strange, as though they were anticipating something. What were they expecting? Lancelot didn't understand, but he didn't think too much. "Hold her down," Lancelot said. He had to take out the arrow before cleaning the wound and stopping the bleeding. Then he would hand her over to the elf Untouchable, who was the only one with healing mana skills, or Duchess Lilo. No, she was now Queen Victoria. Perhaps she knew healing mana skills too. But it was inappropriate for a queen to treat a stranger. He had to strip her clothing. He mumbled an apology and tore off her clothes. Flat. Lancelot had this thought. He shook his head and dismissed all other thoughts, focusing on saving the young girl. He completed the first few basic steps of first aid. The rest of the procedures had to be completed by the elf. When she awoke, he would ask her, "Why did you come close to Victoria City? Didn't you see the warning signs of a private territory?" Chapter 431. Fanciful Battle. Lancelot sat at the entrance of the guild for that night with Sherlock with a group of patient gamers. He had sat at the entrance for a few hours. After treating the young girl, Lancelot felt something change within him. Lancelot wasn't a virgin. As a knight, it wasn't the first time he touched a woman. In fact, he was previously exiled because of a woman. When he was a subordinate of Glamorgan, he stayed in the same room as Count Glamorgan's wife for a night. When he woke up, he was no longer clothed, and Count Glamorgan's wife was washing his clothes and flirting with him. Count Glamorgan came into the room and witnessed everything. Lancelot swore that it started because he had too much to drink. When he thought about it, he felt that someone might have framed him. Lancelot recalled his painful experiences and felt as though he was on the bed and looking at Count Glamorgan's expression. The ironic thing was that he was now Count Glamorgan, and his territory was circled on the ground by the citizens of Victoria City. Lilo and the citizens of Victoria City treated the nobles, their titles, and their territory like a game, but he knew they weren't joking. How could revival be a joke? His memories allowed Lancelot to feel the evil of the human heart and gave him a sense of discouragement. But today, seeing the wounded girl's innocent face and flat chest, the naive feelings made Lancelot return to his youth and the girl next door. Lancelot shook his head. It was his first time meeting the young girl. How could he have such thoughts? The door creaked open. Untouchable cleaned his hands as he walked out. Lancelot sprung up and asked the elf nervously, "How is it?" "The situation inside. Fortunately, you provided first aid. If not, he would have died before I arrived. He's all right now. I used mana to treat his wounds. We'll wait for the young lad to recover consciousness. He's got tough willpower," Untouchable said. "Great." Lancelot felt relieved. A group of gamers was getting ready to dash inside, but Untouchable stopped them and said, "Don't go inside. The wounded patient needs a lot of rest. If the arrow deviated by a few centimeters, it would have penetrated his heart. It was a great fortune. I arranged for 2 clean lads to take care of the young lad, so there won't be any problems." The gamers immediately made disgruntled noises. As for Lancelot, he felt as though his head was hammered because of the elf's words. "Wait, did you say young lad? Ah, I know girls are more meticulous. But how do you know that the wounded lad isn't LGBT? If he's LGBT, letting girls take care of him is too cruel. Even if he's not LGBT, he won't reject being taken care of by guys," the elf, Untouchable, said loudly. The gamers rebuked him immediately. "No, like a normal person, I reject being taken care of by guys. It has surfaced. Double standards have surfaced. I oppose that. I strongly support LGBT. I feel that he's right." Lancelot couldn't endure their chatting. He couldn't believe that the person who made his heart thump faster was a lad. Holy cow! While it was noisy outside, there was an exclamation shriek coming from inside the house. A gamer ran out and shouted, "That lad said that 3,000 knights of the Duke of York arrived at Goldshire Town 3 days ago. They're coming to attack us." "What? That fast?" Lancelot was shocked. He turned around and ran towards the castle. There was no reason for the wounded lad to lie. Though it wasn't known why he was helping Victoria City, the important thing was to defend Victoria City. Some gamers followed Lancelot, while others stayed put to see if there was any development of the plot. Victoria City was filled with a sense of happiness. Boom, boom, boom. The galloping of horses was heard on a small hill not far from Victoria Forest. The 3,000 knights of the York territory spent a day arriving there, and they quickly chose a location for their battle plan. The terrain was hilly and suitable for deployment, and there were no trees on either side. Only 500 knights were required to bait the main forces of Victoria City out. With the knights charging from high ground and infantry charging forward, it was a sure win situation. Even if Victoria City had 30,000 troops, they would be defeated. The golden-haired commander rode his horse and surveyed his knights. Behind the knights were about 10,000 foot soldiers who were also the servants of the knights. They served the knights when not in battle. During the battle, they became light cavalry, infantry, or reserve troops. The golden-haired commander didn't bring along any steam-powered weapons. It was going to be a massacre, so there was no need to bring along the big toys. "John!" The golden-haired commander shouted at a black-haired knight who rode his horse forward and looked at the commander. "You'll deploy here. I'll lead the 500 knights to bait them." "Sir George, you're a commander. It's too dangerous to be bait. Let me go instead," John said righteously. Before he finished speaking, a few nearby knights ran over and shouted, "Commander! There's a large group of enemies charging from the forest." What did you say?" George couldn't believe his ears. More and more knights ran out from the forest, and birds took flight from the fright. Indeed, there was a large group of people moving in the woods. "Everyone, prepare for battle." George gave the order to the knights who were resting behind them. The knights were fast. At the same time, the servants pulled out their long-range weapons. The warriors of Victoria City would be met with the raining of arrows. The Duke of York's order was to enslave the citizens of Victoria City. But from the viewpoint of a battle, they had to defeat and intimidate the enemy before capturing them. The knights spent little time getting into their formation. The servants pulled out their short bows and stood in the front row. The back rows were made up of foot soldiers, while the middle rows and the flanks were made up of 1,000 knights. When the battle commenced, the knights would attack the enemy from different directions and timing. Of course, that was only if the enemy was the main force. George wasn't afraid of the battle with Victoria City. His fear was letting the enemy escape. The enemy struck first because they received information. The fortunate thing was that the chance of the enemy fleeing was slim since they attacked preemptively. Back at the camp, the advisor came out of his tent when he heard the commotion. A few servants immediately guided a horse to his location. The advisor was present to survey the knights, not to participate in the battle. Therefore, he immediately reined his horse and left the camp. John rode his horse and walked beside George. He looked at the movement in the woods and smiled as he said, "They are a group of daredevils. They dared to attack us first. I didn't expect them to have intelligence. It must be the work of a resident of Goldshire Town. We'll capture the mole later on. There are lots of enemies. Be prepared for battle, John," George said. John nodded and pulled down his golden mask, then rode his horse towards the left flank knights. Before them, sounds of charging screams were heard from Victoria Forest. A group of barbarians with mashed-up armor and messy hair dashed out. They were handsome with proportionate figures. Some were tall, some were short, and there were even those who were ugly and deformed. Some were horse riders, but most of them couldn't run very fast. Looking at such hilarious troops, it was unbelievable that they were charging at George's well-trained army. George couldn't help looking at the advisor behind him who was leaving. He was full of disdain for the advisor. He was wary of Victoria City when the advisor fled back to the castle of York in fear. However, looking at the haphazard enemy maneuvers, he knew that his troop formations were going to massacre them. When the enemy was getting close, George waved his hand, and the signaling officer shouted loudly, "Ready the bows. Prepare." The neat sounds of pulled bowstrings rang out beside George. Then there was a shout, "Fire!" Swoosh! Thousands of arrows flew past the horizon before raining down on the charging enemies. A portion of the enemies fell to the ground, while the rest of them charged with arrows sticking out of their bodies. Under normal circumstances, should they not be writhing in pain on the ground? George didn't expect their combat willpower to be that strong. The signaling officer gave the order for the second volley. This time, more enemies fell to the ground. But the enemies continued charging while being shot. George even witnessed a charging enemy who had multiple arrows lodged in him. As the signaling officer was about to order the third volley, George lifted his hand to stop him. He wanted to have more slaves instead of killing them. The enemies who were shot by arrows would die after the battle ended. If all of the enemies were to die, how could George return with only a few hundred slaves? "Prepare to follow me." The golden-haired George rode majestically on his muscular stallion and came before the knights, lifting his longsword and rallying them. The knights had high morale. George pulled down his mask and charged in the front, and the knights followed him. The ground soon shook with the galloping of horses. The charging warriors of Victoria City became excited when they saw the handsome horses and the well-equipped knights. They roared like wild beasts, but George wasn't bothered by it. He was confident that the barbarians wouldn't survive the first wave of attack. It was just as George expected. The knights sliced through the Victorian warriors. It was a massacre. The strong willpower of the Victorian warriors was unable to withstand the impact of the warhorses and the rapid slashing of the weapons. But the game's combat willpower wasn't ordinary willpower. George charged through the paper like resistance, but his speed gradually slowed down as he waded through the Victorian warriors. He felt a strange feeling while the horse was galloping. As a commander, his combat wisdom, bravery, fighting techniques, and battle experience were excellent. What kind of battle had he not encountered? When he lowered his head, he gasped in shock. He had never seen such a situation before. He saw a figure hanging onto his horse's leg. It was an elf. The elf had strange symbols above his head, and he grabbed tightly onto the horse's leg. When the horse galloped, it dragged the elf along, leaving behind a grotesque and bloody mess. The elf didn't die and was muttering, "This horse is mine. This horse is mine." If he wasn't in the midst of a battle, George would have dismounted and ended the life of this crazy elf. When George glanced at his horse, another human grabbed onto the horse's hind leg. The human was like the elf. He had strange green symbols above his head and was shouting, "Gosh! This horse is very cool." He was indifferent to the fact that his body was being dragged along the ground and causing fatal injuries. George's horse was still able to gallop with difficulty after an elf grabbed onto one of its legs. But with a human also grabbing its hind leg, the horse was unable to run. George's warhorse tripped and fell to the ground, forcing George to release the reins and jump off. He didn't panic, though, because his comrades were behind him. George turned his head and saw many knights being pulled off of their horses. However, it was only a small number, and there were many knights still mounted. At this moment, the left and right flank knights attacked, and the foot soldiers behind also charged. However, George didn't know this since he was deep in the enemy ranks. He unsheathed his longsword, which reflected the sunlight. The shiny reflection of his precious sword was normally enough to instill fear in his enemies, but the gamers at his sides didn't show any fear. Instead, their eyes lit up with greediness. An eagle flapped its wings while its eyes glimmered with mana rays. It flew over the boundary of Victoria Forest. Over there was a black and dense mass. A vicious battle was occurring. The three-pronged attack of the warhorses cornered the Victorian warriors, while the tens of thousands of foot soldiers charged forward and overwhelmed the numerically inferior Victorian warriors. The Victorian warriors perished, but reinforcements kept coming out of the forest. Some were alone, some were in tens, while some were in hundreds. However, they were enough to prevent the Victorian warriors from being annihilated. John was killed during the battle. When George discovered his dead body, his equipment was all stripped, and his horse was missing. A noble knight suffered such a humiliating death. There was no compassion in battle. The knights were prepared to be killed in battle. That was the truth of war. George had no time to grieve over the death of his old friend. At the side, one of his knights was using a rope to tie up a struggling Victorian. His hands were cut off before he was subdued. George pushed the knight away and shouted, "Don't capture them, kill them. They have a massive amount of reinforcements." The knight was stunned, but he quickly pulled out his weapon and aimed it at the restrained prisoner who was looking hopeless. When the prisoner saw the weapon, he shouted excitedly, "Gosh! Kill me immediately, I've been tied up for 10 minutes. The knight killed him without mercy. George witnessed the killing. Such a Victorian was too terrifying. George was lost in thought when he saw a black figure flash by. He threw himself to the side to evade. Then, he saw a deformed human. It was Hoodlum. George recognized the man who was prominent in the gladiator arena. Hoodlum was armed with 2 short swords, and he had a short sword in his mouth too. With 3 swords, Hoodlum's swordsmanship was on a divine level. Chapter 432, Professor Bacon's Request Letter for Help. Hoodlum was in a crouching pose, but not because it had a lower center of gravity to allow better defense and attack. His spine was badly deformed, so he had to crouch. That's Hoodlum. Aside from the commanding officer George, other knights also recognized Hoodlum. But George didn't speak because, before him, the Victorians were displaying strange behaviors. A lot of gamers were standing beside Hoodlum and chasing other Victorians away. They began shouting various things. "Give way! Give way! This place is reserved by the Hoodlum Yoga Association. Individual gamers, please go to other places to fight. Thank you. Individual gamers, give way. This boss is ours. There is another boss over there. Please cooperate. We'll kill you if you don't give way." Hundreds of gamers gathered and shouted. It was very intimidating. George noticed that a lot of Victorians had left this area for other places. Hoodlum crouched on the ground, not attacking immediately. He removed the short sword from his mouth and said to his guild members, "Once we start fighting the boss, attack fast. If you're seriously wounded, die immediately, then revive and ride the horses here. We have horses on both sides of our guild. The reinforcements must be fast. Don't lag behind in the battle." After speaking, Hoodlum placed the short sword in his mouth again. George thought that it wasn't necessary to hold the short sword in his mouth. Moreover, wielding double short swords wasn't as powerful as a shield and a short sword. But it wasn't the time to critique Hoodlum's combat technique. Hoodlum was the leader of this group of Victorians, and he had already proven himself in the gladiator arena. Though George thought that Hoodlum was inferior to him, he was still a respectable warrior. When two leaders met on the battlefield, it would be a death duel. George wasn't afraid of such a battle. He swung his weapon and picked up a round shield from the side. The surrounding fighting continued unabated. The knights from the York territory and the gamers of Victoria City purposely gave lots of empty space to George. The knights did so because of their honor as knights, while the Victorians did so because they were being cleared by the Hoodlum Yoga Association. You're an opponent worthy of respect. I'll try my best not to kill you because the Duke needs you. George swung his weapon and walked to the middle of the battlefield. To him, it was his duel ground. Hoodlum was taken aback, not having expected George to speak to him directly. A gamer who was at the side shouted excitedly, "Chairman, you're awesome. Even the NPC recognizes you." Dragonborn was killed twice, but none of the NPCs recognized him. Don't be too excited, proceed as planned. Hoodlum spat out his short sword and reminded the excited guild member. Another guild member asked, "Chairman, shall we surrender? Perhaps they'll send you back to the castle for the strange encounter mission." Impossible. Do you see how vicious the battle is? Even if we want to surrender, it's too late. Okay, don't talk about surrendering. The discussion is over. Take the equipment and horses. I can't let my brothers lose equipment because of me. Hoodlum wanted to bite the short sword with his mouth but found it troublesome. The guild members at the side gave an "okay" hand gesture and said, "Don't worry, Chairman, I've started the video recording." Good, proceed according to our plan. Hoodlum shouted, "Fight the boss." Hoodlum charged towards George. He wielded the double short swords and attacked George viciously. George's eyes glinted coldly when he saw the various shortcomings. He grasped his shield tightly and rammed against Hoodlum. He saw the gap in Hoodlum's attack and used the shield to ram Hoodlum's body. Hoodlum flew out like a kite with a broken string. This blow didn't kill him, but he broke a few bones and was suffering. Though the warriors of Victoria City hadn't broken down, to George, it was just a matter of time. He intended to knock Hoodlum unconscious and capture him, but he instinctively felt danger. Suddenly, tens of arrows flew towards him. He lifted his shield, and the arrows landed on it. Some arrows hit his armor, but they didn't penetrate its protection. But the impact of the arrows made his body ache. George was furious. Was it not supposed to be a duel? Why were there sniping arrows? Before he recovered, another volley of arrows was fired at him. In response, his knights dashed towards the group of Victorians. He saw someone using a strange language, and a fireball appeared in his hands. He then directed the fireball at George. Shucks. Magician. George couldn't help cursing. Sherlock sat in front of his computer and browsed the videos that the gamers had uploaded to the discussion forum. After opening the 3-minute video recording function, the gamers started making in-game recordings. For example, in the Black Volcano battle and the Victoria and York Territory battle, many gamers uploaded videos to the discussion forum. "It's a vicious battle at Victoria City, Lord Sherlock," Bruce said while Sherlock was watching the battle scenes. "Isn't that good? The battle provides combat experience, equipment, and horses. With that many knights, they might be able to create the first cavalry unit. If Victoria City is able to occupy the York territory, it will provide more resources to Eternal Kingdom. It's highly beneficial to us. Lord Sherlock is wise." Brew agreed with Sherlock, but he asked with worry, "But if Victoria shows their power too early, it will attract the attention of the surface world. The politics and conflicts of the nobles and the religions are complicated and dangerous compared to the simple underworld. I share your concern. What do you think I learned as a superior devil? Everything is under control, Brew." A "pom" sound was heard. A black kitten extended his paws and covered his head, then lifted his head to look at the parrot perched on a cabinet. A wooden cup rolled on the ground beside the black kitten. Eggface turned his head to observe the noise. "Iya, apologies," the parrot said as he sidestepped to another wooden cup and extended his leg. Grr. The black kitten's hair stood on end, his eyes filled with murderous intent. He leapt towards the cabinet as the parrot kicked the wooden cup at him. The nimble black kitten dodged the wooden cup, which brushed past his body, as he landed on the cabinet. "I'll tear out all of your feathers," the black kitten said to the parrot as he crouched his body threateningly. "Huh? You? When Michelangelo was conquering the world, if not for Michelangelo, I would have killed you. Now that you're a kitten, it's too easy for me to kill you." The parrot laughed sinisterly while he shifted his legs along the support like a real parrot. The black kitten was ready to leap, but Sherlock grabbed his neck and looked at the parrot. Sherlock waved his hand, and the parrot flew and landed in Sherlock's hand. Then the parrot lowered his head and looked aggrieved. However, it was difficult for a parrot to make such a complex expression. While Sherlock was thinking of roasting or steaming the parrot, there was a knock at the door. Sherlock turned his head to look at the door while he threw the black kitten and the parrot to the side. The two animals quickly returned to their own nests. Meanwhile, Eggface staggered to the door and opened it. "What's up?" At the door was Brainiac. "I'd like to meet Lord Sherlock. I have a matter to discuss with him." "Come in, Brainiac," Sherlock shouted. Eggface gave way and let Brainiac walk in. He then shut the door so that the gamers outside couldn't peep in. Brainiac walked to Sherlock and put a letter in front of him. It was a letter addressed to Brainiac. "What is it?" Sherlock looked at the front of the envelope. Since he didn't have Brainiac's approval, he didn't examine the contents. "These are the letters sent by my mentor, Professor Bacon." Brainiac put every letter in front of Sherlock and said, "Initially, I thought it was an ordinary letter. But these few days, the letters have been too frequent, and the contents have been strange." "Is that so?" "Yes, like this letter. My mentor said that he bought tens of things of bone-strengthening powder and asked me if I wanted some." Eggface, who was standing at the side, said, "Most likely, your mentor is old, so he requires more tonics." "Did he send you the bone-strengthening powder?" "This is the problem. He didn't send any even though I waited for a long time." Brainiac shook his head. "You're saying that your mentor deceived you, so you feel that your mentor is strange?" Sherlock pondered and said, "Perhaps he forgot because he needs to help those poor female students? He's a helpful teacher, so he has a lot of matters to deal with." "That's what I thought initially until I examined those letters carefully. I discovered that there was a difference in timing between me receiving the letters and my mentor writing them. I followed the timing that my mentor wrote them and arranged them in chronological order. Then I examined the contents carefully. I found out that my mentor left a secret message: 'Do not look for me. It is dangerous.'" Brainiac frowned and said worriedly, "My mentor is in great danger." "No, according to logic, if he didn't wish for you to visit him and be in danger, he wouldn't purposely remind you," the parrot abruptly interjected. "Are you a fool? He's a mentor. Would he leave a secret message that says, 'Come and save me, please'? That would be a loss of face. If I was him, I'd do the same thing to attract attention and send out a request letter for help." Polio explained his thinking. The parrot and the black kitten were about to bicker, but when they saw Sherlock pondering, they shut their mouths. "Don't worry. With my close relationship with Professor Bacon, if he's in danger, I'll not sit by and do nothing. We have to consider if the letters were written by Professor Bacon. That, or if it's an elaborate trap to tempt you. I know that the words look like they are from Professor Bacon, but sometimes, the truth isn't apparent." Sherlock stood up and picked up his windbreaker before walking outside. He said to Brainiac, "Come with me. Let's go to Spectre College to find out more. The college will definitely know something. I'm very grateful to you, Lord Sherlock." Brainiac bowed to Sherlock and followed him out of the room. Eternal Kingdom and Spectre College weren't directly connected by teleport portals. Only Spectre College's examination grounds were linked to Eternal Kingdom by teleport portals, and it was quite a distance from the examination grounds to the college grounds. To get to Spectre College, Sherlock had to transit via Winterfell. When Sherlock and Brainiac submitted their applications to visit Spectre College at Winterfell, they were immediately approved. When the coordinates of the teleport portal were adjusted, Sherlock and Brainiac took it to Spectre College. Sherlock was surprised when Professor Bacon didn't receive them. Instead, it was Professor Cabbage. Professor Cabbage was a teacher at Spectre College. In a meeting, she expressed distrust in the Superior Devil and suggested that Spectre College terminate collaboration with Eternal Kingdom. The proposal wasn't accepted by Spectre College. Besides Sherlock, nobody could help Spectre College solve the graduation problem. "I'm happy to meet you, Brainiac and..." Professor Cabbage was dressed in a professional office lady costume. She looked at Sherlock and Brainiac before greeting Eggface. "Welcome, Black Dragon. Call me Master of Dark Flames," Eggface corrected her. Professor Cabbage ignored Eggface. She also ignored the parrot on Sherlock's shoulder and the black kitten Polio by Sherlock's leg, as they were merely pets. It has been a long time since we met Professor Cabbage. Your bones look whiter now. The bone color suits you nicely, especially when you're such a beautiful lady, Sherlock said with a smile. You're such a tease, Lord Sherlock, Professor Cabbage said without emotion. Just as Brainiac was going to state his intent and ask about Professor Bacon, Professor Cabbage waved to Sherlock and said, Professor Bacon managed to contact you. I thought he had no intention to contact you. It's good for you to visit us, as there are many issues of collaboration that we have to flesh out. Please, follow me. Professor Cabbage gestured for Sherlock to follow her, then led everyone forward. Brainiac was about to speak, but Sherlock stopped him. Sherlock shook his head at Brainiac. Soon, the group of a dragon, kitten, parrot, Sherlock, and Brainiac caught up with Professor Cabbage. It was recess time, and the college was full of joyful Lich students. They noticed the group following Professor Cabbage, and most of them recognized Brainiac. Is that Brainiac, the rare genius? Oh my god, I have the chance to meet him. He looks powerful. He's indeed a rare genius. Hasn't Senior Brainiac graduated? Why is he at the college? I guess he's transferring some labor union files or has come here for an investment pitch. Perhaps he has written a book. The Lich students chatted enthusiastically, but none of them dared to talk about Professor Cabbage. Professor Cabbage warned the chattering students to return to their classes. She then brought Sherlock and his followers to her office. She exhaled and took out a thick book before saying, This is the latest updated graduation examination guide. I'm usually in contempt of such a guide, but recently, I received a new version with some shocking contents. Professor Cabbage said gravely, I discovered that your combatants from Eternal Kingdom use the power of sacred light. Please explain, Lord Sherlock. Chapter 433. Master Sleuth Sherlock. After Professor Cabbage finished speaking, she took out an adamantine rock, which was like a video recorder. Sherlock infused his mana into the rock, and images were shown. In the images, a goblin wielded a huge hammer that was greater in size than the goblin himself. His body was emitting blinding white rays while he lifted the huge hammer incredibly high above his head and leapt up. When he landed, he smashed the head of an orc skeleton with the hammer that was covered with white light. The image was filled with sacred, pure, and beautiful white color. Then the images stopped. Professor Cabbage slapped her hand on the table before squinting her eye sockets as she said, Lord Sherlock, though we didn't specify that the combatants couldn't use the power of sacred light in the contract, it wasn't allowed from all perspectives. Most importantly, your sacred knights have caused serious mental harm to our students. They don't dare to sleep or go to the bathroom alone. I think you're mistaken, Professor Cabbage. Sherlock didn't panic and said calmly, I hate the decadent sacred light, and I guarantee that most of my citizens dislike sacred light. Only the decadent surface world creatures favor sacred light. This is actually a new weapon. Professor Cabbage adjusted her imaginary spectacles, which she used to wear before death. She asked, New weapons? That's right. Eggface, please demonstrate. Sherlock shouted to Eggface, who nodded. He understood Sherlock's intention and walked to the table. Then he lifted his fat claws and made pig's wails. Aha! Eggface slammed on the table, but the table didn't move a bit. Sherlock took out some magic powder and drew a rune mana formation on Eggface's claws. Eggface focused on the table, and his arm flashed with white light. He wailed like a pig again. Aha! Pom! This time, the table broke in half. Eggface walked calmly behind the back of Sherlock, who smiled as he looked at Professor Cabbage and said, Professor, there is no sacred light. Those goblins used the new weapons invented by my dungeon. That's why they had a special power. A goblin can hammer an orc skeleton to death. Professor Cabbage was a bit shaken, but she didn't believe what she saw. I've shown you the new weapon. I'm sorry that I can't give you more details. This is our secret. Sherlock spread out his hands, while Professor Cabbage adjusted her imaginary spectacles and said, Apologies, Lord Sherlock, I should have checked first. I'll explain things to the students and their parents. As you know, they were badly shaken. They are extremely fearful of the power of sacred light. Please understand. I understand completely. None of the underworld creatures like that kind of decadent power. Sherlock nodded with sympathy. Professor Cabbage nodded in agreement. She quickly asked, Yes, how's Professor Bacon? Didn't he come with you? You're saying? Professor Bacon left almost a month ago. He said that he was contacting you regarding the sacred light. But it has been so long. Perhaps he's dealing with miscellaneous matters again. He should be focusing on college affairs. Did he say when he's coming back? Sherlock shook his head and said, I'm here because of Professor Bacon. What? Professor Bacon is missing, and he's probably in danger? After listening to Sherlock and Brainiac, Professor Cabbage was in disbelief. She paced around in the room before saying, Pardon my bluntness. It's not that I don't trust you, but this matter is incredible. Perhaps he's helping more of the poor female students, so he hasn't returned? That's why he forgot about contacting Lord Sherlock. Impossible. Though my mentor likes to teach spiritual knowledge, he wouldn't delay college affairs. Moreover, I have my mentor's letters seeking help, Brainiac said immediately. The letters don't prove anything. If he was in danger, would he be able to send the letters? Why doesn't he write a detailed letter seeking help? Professor Cabbage said, I know that you're worried about your mentor, but you must have confidence in him. Though he's not reliable and responsible at times, he was capable when he was young. He was also considered a genius lich. Even if he's old, it doesn't mean he's weak. I think so too. Professor Bacon is very capable. I don't think something happened to him. Perhaps he's busy giving tuition and forgot to come back. However, we can't be sure he's safe either. I hope Professor Cabbage can inform the school about this issue, Sherlock said. I understand. If there's no news in a few days, I'll inform the principal and the school will investigate. If there's news of Professor Bacon, I'll inform you, Lord Sherlock. Sherlock nodded at Professor Cabbage, then left with Brainiac and his followers. Professor Cabbage watched the receding back view of Sherlock. She was pondering for a while before she returned to her office. Brainiac followed behind Sherlock until they were far from Professor Cabbage's office. At a corridor of Spectre College, he couldn't resist asking, Lord Sherlock, why don't we ask the principal directly? Professor Cabbage isn't on good terms with Professor Bacon. She won't inform the principal regarding this issue. If the principal doesn't know about this, it may be a good thing. Sherlock smiled. Wait, Lord Sherlock thinks that my mentor has been giving tuition and forgot to return to college? Brainiac was taken aback. No, how can that be? From his complex way of seeking help, he must be under surveillance and in a precarious situation. Didn't you notice a similar envelope on Professor Cabbage's office table? The words were, to Professor Cabbage, Spectre College Principal. Sherlock put his hands into the pockets of the black windbreaker. There were white flower petals descending outside the windows. A bored lich student must have released his mana during class time. The possibility of a coincidence is low. Since I'm close to your mentor, I know the envelopes used by the college and those used by Professor Bacon for his private letters. You're saying that this matter is related to Spectre College? Brainiac frowned and looked worried. Who knows? We'll find out the truth after an investigation. During the investigation, everyone is a suspect. That's a basic procedure. Eggface suddenly said, Are you the master sleuth Sherlock? No, that's a TV series, Polio replied. But the protagonist's name is identical to Lord Sherlock, and they are both detectives, the parrot said. No, that's different. Lord Sherlock doesn't have Watson. I got it. Eggface looked excitedly at Brainiac and said, You'll be Watson. That's very appropriate. Wah, I'm enlightened. Polio laughed heartily. The parrot opened its beak and laughed. Don't mind them, they just watched too many TV series. I'll reduce their TV exposure. The black dragon, parrot, and black kitten straightened their faces and shut their mouths. Brainiac was looking worried. We'll investigate the letters. Let me examine Professor Bacon's letters. Brainiac took out the letters from his pocket. There were tens of letters, and each of them had identical envelopes and papers. The dates and times on the letters were different from when Brainiac received them. However, the difference was something recent and only happened to Brainiac. The most prominent clue was the missing addresses. There were many secret messages. Every letter had one, and they were only understood by Brainiac and Professor Bacon. For example, Heavy Tangerine and Cat in the Box didn't make any sense, but they were useful messages. They originated from the Winterfell post office. I've checked this in Winterfell. Besides this, there's no other useful information, Brainiac said. According to Professor Cabbage and the time difference in the letters, Professor Bacon went missing around a month ago. We'll investigate the entry and exit records of Professor Bacon at Winterfell. Sherlock walked forward as he said, "Let's go to the Winterfell business office." At the Winterfell business office, a long queue of Underworld residents was queued impatiently in front of a row of counters. This was the place for the Winterfell residents to deal with their daily affairs. Like most of the Merchant Alliance's dungeons, the low efficiency was a cause of concern. If they knew the insiders, then things would be different. "Please help me, pretty." Evelyn bent her back and made a begging gesture with her hands as she implored another succubus. "Don't be so formal, Evelyn. We're close friends, so I'll definitely help you. Could you tell me how you're progressing with Lord Sherlock?" The succubus looked intently at Evelyn and asked. "Ah, why did you ask so suddenly?" Evelyn blushed. Yeah. You're blushing. Evelyn is dating. Sherlock is a good catch. If you don't like, I'll kill you. Sorry." Sherlock and Brainiac were standing outside the door. They overheard the two succubi chatting. Sherlock, Brainiac, Eggface, and Polio were emotionless, while the parrot looked hopeless. What's with this generation? Love? Is that what youngsters are playing nowadays? What's with the succubus as Lord Overseer? A superior devil? In love with the succubus? Was I sealed for too long? Or do the superior devils nowadays have lower standards and think of reproducing all the time? It stinks. Tisk, tisk. The parrot continued blabbering. He didn't notice the faces of Eggface and Polio turning green. Sherlock was indifferent. The parrot shifted his legs since he was excited, then smiled and said to Sherlock, "Lord Sherlock, do you think I'm right? This superior devil is trash." Z's yaw. The door creaked open, and Evelyn walked out, followed by a few succubi who were chatting. The succubi noticed Sherlock and his servants. "Ah, Lord Sherlock. It's the real Lord Sherlock. Is he the Lord Overseer of Evelyn? That's awesome. Can I have your autograph? I'm your fangirl, Lord Sherlock." Yaw. After some chaotic autographing, those succubi left. Meanwhile, the parrot quivered his feathers uneasily, looking like he wanted to fly away but couldn't. "Ah, the scent of youth and the wonders of love. It reminds me of the youthful vigor at dusk," the parrot said after hesitating for a long time. Sherlock lifted his hand and caressed the parrot's beak before tying the beak with a vine. "How's the situation?" Sherlock looked at the blushing Evelyn. "I've checked. There's a record of Professor Bacon entering Winterfell, but there's no exit record," Evelyn said. "Sorry to trouble you," Sherlock said to Evelyn. "It's nothing. That's what I should do. Is there anything else I can do, Lord Sherlock? If not, I'll return to work. I'll return to the Adventurers Guild to help out." Evelyn left warily. She wore a specially chosen dress so that she could present a lovely back view to Sherlock. But Sherlock was hugging his arms and in deep thought. "Lord Sherlock, what do you think?" Brainiac asked with concern. "No, even without an exit record, it doesn't mean Professor Bacon didn't leave Winterfell. We have to find more leads." Sherlock took out the letters and examined them again, then waved his hand and said, "Hand it over to the gamers with a lot more vigor." "Heavy tangerine?" Peasant looked in a daze at not wearing pants and said, "Are you sure those are the hints for the latest strange encounter mission and not from the cat-loving game official who may be playing a prank?" "Cat-loving game official?" Arthur frowned. He couldn't relate heavy tangerine to a cat-loving game official. Cat lovers know that orange cats are easily fed to be overweight, so they're called heavy tangerine, Sylvanas explained. "I didn't expect Sister Vannas to like kittens too." Peasant was surprised. Sylvanas said as a matter of fact, girls usually like small animals. "Of course, I know about them. Shall we go and find orange cats in Winterfell?" Burning Chest Hair asked. "We have to find orange cats, especially those overweight ones not wearing pants," concluded. "Let's go. We'll start with the main streets." Arthur stood up and said, "If it's a strange encounter, it's possible to find it in Winterfell, Eternal Kingdom, Marsh Inkspewer Town, the Outpost at the Crossroad Intersection, the Sighing Wilderness, Distant Small Town, and the Black Volcano. At the Victoria Forest or the boundary of the Moonlight Forest." George felt exhausted. He had never encountered such strange warfare. The enemy had many more troops but didn't send them in all at once or execute a siege. Instead, the enemy deployed the troops bit by bit, like adding fuel to a fire. George felt like he was on the verge of victory, but the incessant reinforcements prolonged the battle until his knights were gradually attrited. He was suddenly enlightened. This Was this part of the enemy's plan? Chapter 434. Heavy Tangerine. George didn't die in battle. Some knights were killed, while others escaped. His good friend John perished in battle. George knelt down hopelessly and dropped his weapon. He looked at Hoodlum, who was stabbed to death many times but was able to reappear again and again before him. Hoodlum wasn't completely killed and was healed by a powerful pastor. That was what George thought. When he finished his action, he was waiting to be killed. But he found that the gamers suddenly stopped attacking. Some other gamers wanted to attack him but were stopped by others. Gosh, stop hitting. If the boss dies, there will be no more strange encounter. The boss has surrendered. Look, he has dropped his weapon. No, he's still wearing armor. What, he's still wearing it? George didn't understand what they were saying. Were they asking him to surrender? George stripped his armor upon seeing that his enemies had no intention to kill him. He thought that they were barbarians that couldn't be understood, but he was wrong. They had no intention to kill a surrendered knight. Likely, they were capturing him. To George, it was good news. He thought he was going to die. Now that he had a chance to live, how could he not be happy? George stripped his breastplate, plate leggings, and pauldrons and was only left with his clothing. The gamers continued their discussion. No, I have to kill him. He's still wearing his clothing. That's quality clothing. Gosh, it's really nice. It's a noble's clothing. Stop hitting him. The boss has surrendered. The group of gamers shouted at each other. George was about to shed tears of humiliation, but he endured it and took off his clothing. Then he was captured and brought back to Victoria City. In a cold metal cage, George lowered his head dispiritedly and looked listlessly outside. It was much more dilapidated than the poorest village. This was Victoria Freedom City. Though it was a freedom city with many more humans, the roads and houses were inferior to a common village. Though George wasn't knowledgeable, he knew that the construction materials used in Victoria City weren't produced by professional machines. They were produced by amateurs. Even George thought that he could produce them. The only appealing building was the castle. Though it was made of plants, its magnificence and building style were appealing to the eyes. It didn't have any traces of manufacturing. Besides the buildings, their way of storing their items was strange. They didn't have a dedicated warehouse officer. All of the equipment was stacked at the empty spot outside the castle, together with the blood-stained equipment and food materials. It was grotesque. Did they eat such stuff? Green, blue, and colorful stuff that looked like it was made of animal parts. George was feeling fortunate that they weren't ogres. He saw the Victorians stacking the dead humans together. Then they burned the corpses without any emotion or rituals. When they brought back the dead horses, they were sad and despondent. It seemed like a horse was more precious than a human. George wasn't a saint. Though he was a knight and a Christian, he didn't harbor any kind of compassion in battle. It was already great compassion to gather all of the corpses for incineration. That would prevent the bodies from being eaten by wild beasts. They were also worried about the possibility of a plague. Who knew, and why would they be concerned? George was letting his imagination run wild. He couldn't understand how he was defeated by these ill-equipped barbarians. Undeniably, these barbarians were handsome and beautiful. There were also fairies and elves. A fat hamster appeared before the cage and gave him a fright. Is he the boss? The hamster gazed at George and spoke in an unknown evil language. Yes, it's him. He's got yellow hair. Another hamster came close. When do we have our meal? That was the third hamster. Oh, Lancelot is here. Speak in the human language, the first hamster said nervously. Hi, Count Glamorgan. Are you here to see the boss? The second hamster straightened his body. He was speaking in a language that George understood. While George was trying to figure out the intent of the three hamsters, he saw a familiar face. It was Lancelot. Since when did he become Count Glamorgan? Did he have a noble's title? Lancelot grasped his sword hilt and walked over. He looked at the caged George and the three hamsters, then bowed to the hamsters. Though he was Count Glamorgan, he didn't take it to heart. Count Glamorgan, we intend to bring this golden-haired lad to see Queen Victoria. Do you have any matters? Big Boss looked at Lancelot and asked. No, I heard the description of the prisoner and thought I may know him. So, I came to take a look. Lancelot shook his head and looked at George while he squatted down. It has been a long time, George. Laugh if you will, "You unfaithful Lancelot," George said as he looked in disdain at Lancelot. George was in a hilarious situation. He didn't have any clothes and looked like an animal in the metal cage. "What's up? What George? What unfaithful Lancelot? Were you two classmates? Did you give each other names in class?" Second boss looked bewildered at George and Lancelot. Big boss said, "It's their custom. They like to create titles. Like Hoodlum, he was called Slumbering Hoodlum because he was good at sleeping." Second boss was enlightened. The hamsters talked to themselves, but Lancelot wasn't bothered. He looked at George and said, "Queen Victoria is a capable lady. What she asks you to do, I hope that you won't decline. This is your last chance for survival." George laughed and didn't speak. Big boss opened the metal cage, and second boss threw a set of clothes to him. He couldn't be naked when he visited Lilo. Fat Otaku was drooling when he saw the metal cage, but Big Boss dragged it away. George followed the three hamsters to the castle. He thought he would be allowed to go inside to meet Queen Victoria, though he wasn't sure why a poor Victoria village would have a queen. George thought too much. The door on the second floor wooden balcony opened, and a medium-height young lass of about 13 or 14 years old came out. She wasn't wearing any crown, but she was Queen Victoria, Lilo, Her Highness. "Are you George?" Lilo stood on the balcony and gazed down at George. George nodded. He didn't look good. He suspected that Queen Victoria might be humiliating him. Even the king couldn't stand on the balcony and speak to him in a condescending manner. "Good. Where's the Duke of York? Does he have a female successor? Where is she?" Lilo asked a few questions in succession, but George looked astonished. He didn't reply. Lilo frowned. She was running out of patience. A pale human stood out. He was the person shot by Softy. Lancelot watched the person walk out and felt as if his heart was being hammered. It was a feeling of love, and the target was a lad. "Your Highness Queen Victoria, let me say a few words," the person shouted with great effort. Though there were many gamers watching, Lilo didn't wish to hear their chatting, so she exerted her dominance to control them. The gamers weren't bothered as they were in plot animation mode. Queen Victoria looked at the person and nodded, allowing him to speak. The person was agitated, so his body trembled. He shouted to Queen Victoria, who was on the balcony, "Your Highness, I know the location of the castle of the Duke of York. I also know about his successor. I'm one of his successors." The person shouted, and at the same time, George screamed loudly, "Traitor! Are you letting your uncle down?" As he shouted, he was restrained by three unruly hamsters. Lilo didn't ponder as she said, "Good, you shall be the wife of Count Lancelot. We'll kill the Duke of York, and you shall succeed him. The York territory will be part of my fief. It's decided." Lilo turned to leave, but she recalled something. She pointed to George, who was restrained by the three hamsters, saying, "Release him. Let him return to inform the Duke of York to prepare his warriors and equipment. Victoria City is exacting our revenge." Lilo returned to her castle after speaking. George, Lancelot, and the unknown successor to York territory were gaping in astonishment. Ooh, ooh, ooh. George was being pulled away by the three hamsters. Lancelot shouted, wait for a moment. He's a lad." Lilo had no intention to show herself. The cute boy was taken aback, but he ran to Lancelot and bowed to him before shouting with his eyes closed, "From today onwards, I'm your wife. Help me defeat the Duke of York. Help me get back the York territory." Lancelot was unable to understand what was going on. The gamers who were out of the plot animation mode left happily. They obtained equipment and horses. In the near future, they would have a chance to attack the York territory. How could they not be happy? They were complaining of the thin plot. Now, they wished for less, but they couldn't resist the desire to attack the York territory. At Winterfell, Arthur, not wearing pants, Sylvanas, peasant, burning chest hair, and 20 other Pioneer Alliance members were looking for possible leads. Recently, the gamers of Eternal Kingdom combed the streets to find leads for the Strange Encounter mission. The other game maps weren't large, only the Winterfell map was huge. For the past few days, the gamers of Eternal Kingdom searched Winterfell. Especially the large guilds. Due to the animosity amongst the guilds, they didn't wish their competitors to find the leads of the Strange Encounter mission. However, they were unable to attack and kill each other in Winterfell. So, they made full use of their time and the most efficient methods to find possible leads. That was what Arthur's guild was doing. Where can we find the heavy tangerine and the cat in a box? Is there an orange cat in this world? Peasant walked for a long time, and his eyes were getting blurry, but he didn't spot any cats. Lord Sherlock had a black cat. Though it wasn't an orange cat, he was harassed by the gamers. As long as there was a close relation to cats, the gamers would investigate to see if they could find any leads. From the posts on the discussion forum, the gamers didn't have any breakthroughs. It was late at night, and the gamers were tired after a day of searching. Many gamers got offline. They would continue the search tomorrow. Arthur wouldn't force his guild members to stay overtime to search for clues. After all, they were playing computer gamers and not working. Arthur didn't pay his members any salary, unlike the other rich guilds. Finally, there was only Arthur and his 5-member team. Raintia would go offline punctually every night. What shall we do? Shall we go offline too? It's 3 in the morning. There aren't many gamers left. Even the night market is closed, Burning Chest Hair said as he pointed to a shop that was packing up for the night. There was a night market in Winterfell. The gamers knew about it. Arthur and his members had been searching until late at night before going offline. Arthur looked at the time and intended to go offline. Not wearing pants suddenly shouted, "Gosh! Is that heavy tangerine?" He pointed to a shop that was packing and closing. They saw a shopkeeper who was wearing clothing with an orange cat imprinted on the chest. The orange cat wasn't overweight, but the shopkeeper was obese. Heavy tangerine. The 5 of them eyed each other before running over. The shopkeeper noticed them and stopped closing. He shouted at them, "Are you from Eternal Kingdom? Apologies, I have some matters to deal with today. Normally, I'd treat you to a bowl of food. No, shopkeeper, we're not here to eat. We'd like to ask you questions." Sylvanas took out a photograph that showed a skull and asked, "Do you know him?" The shopkeeper looked at the photograph and examined it carefully. Peasant also took out a photograph that showed another skeleton and said, "This is the disciple of his missing mentor." "Did you see his mentor before?" The shopkeeper looked at the 2 photographs. After comparing and switching the photographs, he looked at the 5 gamers and then lowered his head to examine the photographs before saying, "Are you trying to fool me?" They didn't obtain any information. The shopkeeper was angry due to some strange reason and shouted, "I haven't seen the skeleton." Now scram. Seeing their lead coming to a dead end, Peasant asked casually, "Boss, where did you buy the shirt?" Chapter 435, Arrest Warrant. Is this the shop that sells that shirt? Sylvanas stood at the dead end of a winding alley. Instead of a garment shop, it was more appropriate to call it a criminal's nest. The outer walls were filled with graffiti, while the main door was blackened by a previous scorching. On top of that, there was a huge crimson word, "Torn," on the wall. At the corner of the shop, a slender gnome with deep eye sockets and eyes that were thirsty for knowledge was reading a tattered old mathematical book passionately. When he discovered someone coming in, he lifted his head nervously. When he saw Arthur and his friends, the gnome climbed up and ran off. The entire alley was filled with a sense of decadence. "I don't know, but the shopkeeper pointed us here," Burning Chest Hair said puzzledly. Not Wearing Pants said, "He said that he was giving us guidance because we are from Eternal Kingdom and warned us not to tell others." Could it be a criminal's nest? Isn't this better? We can rob them, Peasant said excitedly. Robbing others is illegal. Sylvanas replied angrily. You thought that the internet is outside the purview of the law? Burning Chest Hair said, "Stop fooling around. Can one of you knock on the door?" The light on the shop sign is still on, Not Wearing Pants said as he pointed to the shop sign overhead. The shop sign was still lit up. The sign read, "Not selling clothes, open." Though it was open, the main door was tightly shut. Arthur walked up and knocked on the door. "Who's that?" A voice came out of the shop. The main door was slightly ajar, and a rounded black nose peeped out. The nose had large nostrils and thick nose hairs. It sniffed hard. "Orcs, what do you want? If you're learning in secret at my door and asking me for food, please go and die." The creature spoke rapidly before inhaling deeply as though he was out of breath. He was then going to shut the door, but Arthur stopped him from closing it and accidentally cut the black nose. Ouch! While he was shouting out in pain, Arthur said, "Apologies, we're here to buy things." The creature with the big nose closed the door and opened up several locks behind it. The door was opened, and a squinting mole stood at the door. He sniffed hard before giving way as he said, "6 of you?" Please come in. Arthur and his friends looked at each other. There were only 5 of them. The mole's nose wasn't very accurate. The 5 of them entered the shop, and the mole invited them to take a seat. He then took out a menu and placed it before them. What would you like to eat? The mole stood at the side and asked. No, we're not here to eat. The mole said, not here for food? Ah, are you here for room rental? I have very good rooms. What do you like? Without windows? Rooms with windows are best for underground creatures. Those who request open windows and air circulation, I don't understand why they did that. The mole looked frustrated, but his guests said, no, we're not here for rental. Tisk, are you here to buy clothes? The mole showed his look of disdain. No, we're here to find a creature, Sylvanas said, and the mole was excited. Finding a creature? You've found the correct sleuth. Who are you looking for? Cheating partner? Child's infatuation target? Or other targets? No matter what it is, we don't want to sell clothes can help you. We're the best at sleuthing. Arthur and his friends looked at each other. Then, Not Wearing Pants took out a photograph. Do you recognize the creature in the photograph? Not Wearing Pants asked. The mole squinted his eyes and hesitated. He sniffed and said, can you provide his personal items? Professor Bacon's personal items weren't difficult to obtain. Arthur and his comrades returned to Eternal Kingdom and found Brainiac. Brainiac didn't expect to have news so fast. There were many personal items belonging to Professor Bacon in his office. Brainiac brought back a professor's costume and handed it over to Arthur. Arthur and his comrades took the costume and hurried back to the shop called Don't Want to Sell Clothes. They wanted the mole to find Professor Bacon. When they returned to the shop, they saw something unexpected. The shop Don't Want to Sell Clothes was engulfed in huge flames. Winterfell's fire engine beetlemans were parked outside the alley. Tens of uniformed orcs and gnomes were scurrying in the ruined shop that was burned down. They were looking for survivors. Cherry stood at the ruined shop entrance and smoked his burning metal stick. It's an accident. It's a garment shop, but it's secretly doing food and beverages. There was even a naked fire at the back. The uncovered fire burned the cloth materials in the warehouse and caused the fire. A garrison guard concluded after an initial inspection. Another garrison guard said, not necessarily. According to our intelligence, there were 5 citizens of Eternal Kingdom who came here to find a creature. Soon after they left, the shop caught fire and the shopkeeper was burnt to death. He's a mole and doesn't need to sleep at night, so why didn't he escape during the fire? We can't exclude the possibility of suicide. A few garrison guards looked at Cherry. When Cherry was working in small distant town at the foot of the Black Volcano, he contributed to solving a big case. Though Cherry wasn't able to claim much credit, Dungeon Lord Nicholas invited him to return to Winterfell and gave him a new position, Winterfell Garrison Guard Senior Captain. Senior Captain was more prestigious than Captain. Cherry considered the offer and struggled for a long time. After 3 seconds, he accepted the offer reluctantly. The citizens of Eternal Kingdom, who first discovered the incident, immediately informed the Garrison Guard. Senior Captain Cherry arrived at the crime scene in a hurry. Everyone looked at Cherry. They were waiting for Cherry's professional opinion. Cherry inhaled silently and made Z, Z, Z sounds before saying, 5 of them came here to ask questions, and the shopkeeper perished. It looks like an accident. Cherry was far from being a famous sleuth. The burning metal stick in his hand fell to the ground and made da, da sounds. He then said, it was a garment shop, but it flouted the rules and ran as a restaurant. The uncovered fire in the kitchen lit up the cloth in the warehouse and caused the fire. But Captain Cherry, when an orc was about to pose a question, another garrison guard immediately corrected him, call him Senior Captain Cherry. Apologies, Senior Captain Cherry, but if it was an accident, why didn't the mole shopkeeper escape? Wasn't he awake at that time? Cherry leaned against the wall, lifting one of his legs and resting it on the wall. He lowered his head and hid half of his face in the shadows. He looked grave as he said, responsibility. The garrison guards at the side were shocked. The garrison guard that posed the question was enlightened. He said, is that so? I understand. The 5 of them were going to meet the shopkeeper, so he waited for them to return. From his business records, besides selling a few articles of clothing, he didn't have any income. Finally, he was able to do business, and he wanted to complete the deal even if he died. Therefore, he was burnt to death. I see. I understand. Issue arrest warrants for the 5 witnesses. If not for them, the shopkeeper wouldn't have died. The garrison guards were about to capture the 5 of them when someone shouted, "Senior Captain, come here immediately. I have a new discovery." Cherry lifted his head and saw a few citizens of Eternal Kingdom surrounding the ruins and looking at something. Cherry lit up a metal stick in silence and beckoned his garrison guards over. He said, "The case has new developments." Chapter 436, Professor Bacon's Leads. Dead? The leads are broken again? Sherlock asked when Brew reported to him. "No, the gamers found new leads. The cat in the box," Brew said as an image appeared on Sherlock's computer. The image was a post from the discussion forum. The gamers had recorded a 3-minute video about a box that contained a cat puppet. "This is a puppet cat that has rune mana." Polio looked at the puppet on the screen and recognized it immediately. The parrot on Sherlock's shoulder nodded and said, "Someone used the rune mana to control this puppet." Could it be a playful prank made by a child? The kitten and the parrot were talking, but Sherlock didn't join them. He asked, "Where is this puppet cat?" Since it's a piece of evidence from the crime scene, it was taken back to the Winterfell Garrison Guard Station, Brew said. Sherlock took his overcoat and prepared to leave. But Brew said, "Lord Sherlock, there's news on the forum that I'm very concerned about." "I feel that you should take a look," Brew said, and the screen showed a video that depicted Arthur and his comrades meeting with the mole shopkeeper. In the video, the mole shopkeeper mentioned 6 guests. "Lord Sherlock, I know it's not appropriate to probe, but are you sure that you haven't been following them?" Brew asked. Sherlock shook his head and said, "No, I wouldn't do such a thing, but I can guess who it is." "Brew, find Brainiac, and have him come to my office." Brew was feeling bewildered and replied to Sherlock, Lord Sherlock, Brainiac isn't in Eternal Kingdom or the Winterfell Adventurers Guild. He's also not within the activity boundary of the gamers. Is he on leave today?" Sherlock stroked his chin and pondered. Then he said, "This is interesting. Don't find Brainiac. He's missing. Are you sure that Brainiac has been following Arthur and his comrades? It's too far-fetched to say that he was following them. Brainiac is also investigating the whereabouts of Professor Bacon. He could have bumped into them. We have to find Brainiac to know the truth." Sherlock shrugged his shoulders and left the Dungeon Lord main hall. Sherlock was frowning, so he wasn't in a good mood. In the Winterfell Dungeon Lord main hall, Sherlock sat before Nicholas. Between them was the puppet kitten obtained from the Winterfell Garrison Guard Station. "Lord Sherlock, is this puppet related to the missing Professor Bacon?" Nicholas asked solemnly. How does Dungeon Lord Nicholas know?" Sherlock raised his brow. He didn't expect Nicholas to know about the missing Professor Bacon. I just obtained information from the garrison guards. Gamers of Eternal Kingdom reported a case to the garrison guards and provided some strange messages. They said that the messages were related to the missing Professor Bacon. From the 5 suspects, witnesses' testimonies, they were searching for the missing Professor Bacon, Nicholas explained, and Sherlock nodded. "I see. It's as Dungeon Lord Nicholas has said. Due to some reason, Professor Bacon went missing. Before he went missing, he wrote letters to Brainiac, who is his favorite student. I will definitely help Brainiac, so I let my citizens go out and search for Professor Bacon. I didn't expect such an unfortunate incident to occur. Yes, it's depressing. The young shopkeeper was burnt to death due to an accident." Nicholas nodded and was looking very sad. "Is the garrison guard treating the case as an accident?" Sherlock was taken aback. "Yes, it's normal to have an accident considering the shopkeeper was operating a restaurant and had an open fire around flammable objects. I ordered the inspection of all of the fire hazards in Winterfell. The relevant departments are to supervise and impose heavy penalties on offenders." Sherlock nodded and pointed to the puppet kitten on the table as he said, "Then, the case should be handled as an accident." "Yes, can you give the puppet kitten to me?" Nicholas wouldn't decline Sherlock's request. He generously gave the puppet to Sherlock. Sherlock discovered the secret within the puppet. It was a concealed magical recording device. The eyes of the puppet were round adamantine rocks that recorded images. Sherlock brought the puppet kitten back to Eternal Kingdom. When he was in the Dungeon Lord main hall, he infused his mana into the puppet, and images appeared. A blurred image of Professor Bacon appeared. He looked very nervous. "If you see this image, Brainiac, it means you've found the correct leads. I can't say too much, and I can't tell you where I am because I don't know." I'm unable to articulate the events that I encountered. Perhaps, you will be able to find a way to locate me. Professor Bacon looked around and used his mouth to say a few words silently, then the images stopped. The other mana-infused round adamantine rock only showed videos of cats. Yes, it was all about cats. What does it mean? He could have spoken, so why did he do a charade? Professor Bacon doesn't have lips, so we're unable to decipher what Professor Bacon was saying, Bruce said with exasperation. But Sherlock remained silent. He lowered his head and was in deep thought. Then, his eyes lit up, and he said, I got it. What, Lord Sherlock, you know the answer? Chapter 437, Fantasyscape. Brainiac went missing after Professor Bacon went missing. Things started to become weird, but Sherlock was composed. He knew the truth. The burnt-down shop was cordoned off with warning tape. Occasionally, there were local residents who passed by and glanced at the shop. The gamers were no longer interested as they had searched thoroughly without finding anything. Lord Sherlock, do you think Brainiac is still here? Bruce said with surprise. I can guarantee that your loyal servants thoroughly checked the place. There are no traces of Brainiac. Even if he died in the fire, wouldn't there be ashes? Normal fire is unable to kill Brainiac. An investigation has to be conducted to find out if he's still here. Sherlock said, and he scratched the parrot, Phoenix, on his shoulder. Phoenix was taken aback. Then he flapped his wings and circled one time before landing among the ruins. He started searching using his claws. Phoenix stopped at a spot and extended his leg as he said, over here. What's that, Lord Sherlock? Is the Phoenix able to find traps? Brew asked in surprise. Phoenix is sensitive to mana like a hamster, Sherlock explained and walked towards the parrot. Sherlock didn't use too much effort to locate the strange spot that was pointed out by Phoenix. A mana rune was imprinted on the floor. Even though the surroundings were destroyed by the fire, the mana rune was intact. Sherlock squatted down and used his finger to clear the dust from the mana rune before examining it. It's a crude mana rune. Was it placed by the shopkeeper, meow? Polio said in disdain as he waved his long tail and circled the rune mana formation twice. Huh? How do you know? You only know how to control others using mental power. How would you understand mana runes? The parrot, Phoenix, said sarcastically as he looked at Polio, who roared out furiously. Meow tilde. Then Polio pounced at Phoenix. When they recovered themselves, Sherlock was nowhere in sight. Lord Sherlock? The parrot hopped as he called out suspiciously. In the dream, Winterfell looked as if it was in the water with ripples. The various passers-by looked like the street scene, which gave an unreal dreamy feeling. Lord Sherlock? What is this? Brew was able to see the scene via Sherlock's vision with permission from him. This is a fantasy-scape created by someone. Sherlock looked at the surroundings. It was the don't want to sell clothes shop before it was burnt down. Who did such a thing? Isn't the mana impression supposed to open up secret tunnels? Instead, it created a fantasy-scape for us to watch a movie? Brew asked with frustration. This isn't an ordinary fantasy-scape. This is a completely immersive environment. We traveled to the fantasy-scape from reality via the mana impression. This impression isn't easily detected by normal creatures. And at crucial moments, it can be used to protect oneself if the mana impression isn't damaged. Sherlock saw the mole shopkeeper snoring in the shop. Outside the shop was the alley followed by the streets of Winterfell. From Sherlock's location, one could see the decadent underworld creatures outside. They sat in the boxes while reading books and chatting about mathematical formulas and topics. After the initial blurring and distortion of the images, the scene before Sherlock became clearer. It looked almost like reality. What if the mana impression is damaged? Brew suddenly asked. If it's damaged, the consequences are worse than death. The trapped creature can't escape from the fantasy-scape and will become lost before becoming part of the fantasy-scape, Sherlock said with composure. Let's leave immediately, Lord Sherlock. Brew panicked and said, both Polio and Phoenix were defeated by you. If they know how the damaged mana impression will affect you, they'll destroy it. Don't worry, they won't discover it. Sherlock had no intention to leave. He found a chair and sat down. This is a new technique that surfaced a few hundred years ago. Phoenix was sealed for thousands of years, while Polio was imprisoned in Bancasia for 1,000 years. They were like hermits disconnected from society. How would they know such new technology? But Sherlock, what if? Brew wanted to persuade Sherlock, but he lifted his hand to interrupt Brew. I have a reason for not leaving. Sherlock pointed to the approaching skeleton in front. From the crack on his forehead, he was Professor Bacon. It's highly likely this was the lead left by Professor Bacon for Brainiac. Bacon looked as though he didn't see Sherlock as he walked briskly into the shop. When Bacon entered, the mole awakened in shock. Welcome, Professor Bacon? The mole's nose quivered. He had recognized the scent of Professor Bacon. It has been a long time, mole shopkeeper. Professor Bacon looked exhausted. He walked to Sherlock's side but didn't sense the presence of Sherlock. The scene was depicting history. Why are you in Winterfell? Aren't you busy at college? The mole shopkeeper poured a cup of bloody chrysanthemum tea for Professor Bacon and wiped the table in front of him. Though the shopkeeper was blind, his nose was very sensitive. I have an important item to hand over to you, Professor Bacon said nervously after looking around. Can I place this item here? Professor Bacon took out a box. It was a box with a puppet kitten. What's this? The shopkeeper took the box and sniffed carefully. He couldn't figure it out. This is an item for my student Brainiac. If he comes here, please give it to him, Professor Bacon said. Wait, I don't know your student. Did you give him my address? This isn't an easy place to find. The shopkeeper hesitated for a while before asking. I didn't give him the address directly, but he will find your location. You must give the box to him, Professor Bacon said solemnly. Professor Bacon, did you encounter trouble? Are you in debt? Though I don't have money, if you need help, please tell me, the shopkeeper said with concern. No, you aren't able to help me, and it'll be troublesome. If I'm not careful, I'll be killed. I don't wish to implicate you. Professor Bacon waved his hand. The shopkeeper said, Ah, I see. Forget about it. Okay, since you want to know, I'll tell you. Professor Bacon said quickly. The incident started from Spectre College. While Professor Bacon was speaking, the world disintegrated while his figure distorted. There was no sound. What's the situation? Brew's nervous voice appeared in Sherlock's mind. Sherlock lifted his head and observed the world disintegrating. He frowned and said, Someone destroyed the mana impression. 5 minutes ago. When Sherlock vanished, the loyal, Polio and Phoenix became nervous. They looked around for Lord Sherlock. Lord Sherlock, meow. Lord Sherlock? Sherlock was nowhere in sight. As they couldn't find Lord Sherlock, they became anxious. Lord Sherlock is missing? Phoenix stood in place, bewildered. He looked around and didn't find Sherlock. Does that mean we can leave, meow? Polio showed his gleeful expression. Phoenix was dumbfounded, then he shouted, Lord Sherlock. This stupid cat is going to escape. Kill him. Phoenix shouted for a long time, but Sherlock was nowhere in sight. He lowered his head and thought hard. Why did you do that, meow? Phoenix replied to Polio's accusation. I wanted to confirm whether Sherlock was around. That really is the case. Most likely, it's due to the mana impression. He could have been killed by it. Huh? Dead? Why are you shouting for him? That devil deserves to die. He beat me up real bad. Now that he's dead, it's cause for celebration, meow. Polio would be tempted to applaud if he could achieve such a difficult action. Lord Sherlock, Polio is saying bad things about you. Phoenix shouted again. This time, Polio's hair stood on end. Phoenix waited for a while, but there was no response. Ah, Sherlock's really dead. Are you a fool? Or are you trying to fool me, meow? Polio stood up angrily. He looked as though he was going to duel Phoenix, who said, Now isn't the time for our personal grievances. Let's leave this dangerous place. I was trying to confirm Sherlock's absence. It's not personal. What if Sherlock's still around? Polio questioned the parrot with a malicious gaze. Phoenix lowered his head and thought for a while before saying, Let's go. Let's escape together. He said after contemplation, No, you'll escape on your own. I won't escape with you, meow. Polio chose a direction and was about to leave when the parrot behind him shouted, Ah. Egg face, you're here at the right moment. I saw Polio escaping. That stupid cat, he's betraying Lord Sherlock. No, not me. I didn't. He's framing me. He's escaping. Polio rebuked as Eggface walked over with his obese body. What are you doing? Where's Lord Sherlock? Eggface was puzzled. He noticed the mana impression on the ground. What's this? The parrot and the black kitten looked at each other. Then they looked at Eggface and asked, "Don't you know? Don't you know where Lord Sherlock is?" "Of course, I don't. I'm here to look for Lord Sherlock," Eggface said as he moved to the front of the mana impression. He then said, "Let me take a look, is Lord Sherlock inside?" Eggface lifted his claw and slammed down on the mana impression. A crisp slapping sound was heard, and the mana impression disintegrated. To be more precise, the entire floor disintegrated. "What are you doing, meow?" Polio gaped at Eggface in astonishment. "To save Lord Sherlock. He's likely trapped inside. If I break the mana impression, won't Lord Sherlock appear?" "Why did you do that? What if he appears?" Phoenix shook his head wildly, as though he was going crazy. "Oh, you did that? Lord Sherlock. I had no intention of escaping, meow." Though Sherlock hadn't appeared, Polio started explaining himself. While Phoenix was going to be the prosecuting witness to expose Polio's escape, the mana impression broken by Eggface started glimmering. Once the light rays vanished, Sherlock appeared before the Black Dragon, Parrot, and Black Kitten. The three of them became quiet as they stared at Sherlock. Sherlock frowned. He looked at them and asked Eggface, "Did you break the mana impression?" "Lord Sherlock, I've saved you." Eggface looked excited, but Sherlock frowned and asked, "Who is Master of Dark Flames?" Eggface looked befuddled. Sherlock raised his sandbag-sized fist and punched at Eggface. Sherlock's fist landed on Eggface and penetrated his fat body as though it was a paper window. Eggface didn't bleed or wail in pain. Phoenix and Polio were terrified. Sherlock killed the dragon with a single punch because he was unhappy. Sherlock was too violent. Eggface fell to the ground, but he didn't die. It wasn't Eggface on the ground. The black dragon's body melted like a piece of chocolate in the hot sun and stuck to Sherlock's body. The black mud wrapped around Sherlock's arms. Sherlock's arms emitted white rays, and the black mud writhed in pain before falling to the ground and hardening into gray blocks that looked like dried mud. "What's that, meow?" Polio walked over and touched the gray blocks with his paw while sniffing them. Polio was shocked. "That's the Ancient Gods clan," Phoenix said confidently. "Interesting." Sherlock used his leg to gather the mud together. Brew said, "I didn't expect the Ancient Gods to be involved." "Why did the imprisoned Ancient Gods stop you from investigating the missing Professor Bacon? Are they involved in this matter?" "Who knows? I guess so. The Ancient Gods have been imprisoned for too long. It's understandable for them to create some trouble during their free time," Sherlock said. "But the leads are broken again, Lord Sherlock." "No, there are leads. We're going to Spectre College. At Victoria City. All members, get ready. Put the carriage behind the horses." Lancelot was in Moonlight Forest, or the outer boundary of Victoria Forest, supervising the gamers to create a horse-pulled carriage. It was improvised for the invasion of the York territory. Queen Victoria was serious about conquering the York territory.